Hello guys, welcome to Percy Jackson. So in this video, we will see, what if Percy read the Naruto Summon 20 girl for start new married life. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Divine Scroll. The dust in the big house attic seemed determined to make Percy Jackson sneeze. He'd been helping Chiron sort through centuries of accumulated magical artifacts for 3 hours now, and his nose was staging a revolt. Remind me again why we're doing this? Percy asked, carefully moving aside what looked like a bronze astrolabe but occasionally sprouted tiny legs. Chiron's wheelchair couldn't make it up the narrow attic stairs, so the centaur stood in his full form, his white stallion's body shifting nervously in the cramped space. Because, Percy, after 2 wars, it's become apparent that we need better inventory of our magical items. You never know when some forgotten trinket might be exactly what's needed in a crisis. Percy nodded, though he suspected Chiron was also keeping him busy. At 22, he was one of the older demigods still spending time at camp. Most moved on to college or careers, visiting occasionally but building lives in the mortal world. Percy had tried university for a while, but after saving the world twice, sitting in lecture halls felt hollow. Besides, Chiron added with a knowing smile, I thought you might appreciate a task that doesn't involve fighting monsters for once. I do, Percy admitted, though I'm starting to think the dust bunnies up here are evolving into a new monster species. He lifted a tarnished shield, revealing a small wooden box beneath it. The box was unremarkable except for the faint glow emanating from beneath its lid. Percy had learned enough to be cautious around glowing objects, but not enough to actually resist opening them. Hey, Chiron, what's this? The centaur's eyes narrowed as he moved closer, hooves carefully navigating between piles of magical junk. I don't recall seeing that before. Percy lifted the box carefully. It felt warm, almost alive in his hands. The wood was dark with age but polished to a soft sheen, and intricate carvings covered its surface, symbols that looked partly Greek and partly something else. Some of these are Greek letters, Percy said, tracing a finger over the engravings. But these others look Asian. Japanese, maybe. Chiron frowned. Cross-pantheon artifacts are extremely rare. And often problematic. Let me see. Percy handed over the box, and Chiron examined it with the careful attention of someone who'd seen seemingly harmless objects level cities. Interesting, the centaur murmured. These are indeed Japanese characters intertwined with Greek. A collaboration between pantheons is unusual. The Japanese deities tend to keep to themselves. Chiron carefully opened the lid. Inside, nestled on faded red silk, lay a scroll. The parchment had an iridescent quality, seeming to shift between cream, pale blue, and soft gold depending on how the light hit it. Percy felt drawn to it in a way he couldn't explain. What does it do? He asked, leaning closer. I'm not certain, Chiron said, his voice taking on the cautious tone Percy had learned to be wary of. But I sense significant power. Perhaps we should consult. Whatever consultation Chiron was about to suggest was interrupted by the dinner conch horn blowing across the valley. We'll continue this tomorrow, Chiron decided, carefully closing the box. I'll keep this secure until we know more about it. Percy nodded, but as Chiron turned to navigate back toward the stairs, the centaur's back legs bumped a precariously balanced pile of bronze weapons. As they clattered to the floor, Chiron instinctively reared up, and the sudden movement sent the wooden box flying from his hands. Percy's reflexes kicked in. He lunged forward, catching the box before it hit the ground, but the impact popped the lid open, and the scroll tumbled out, rolling across the dusty floorboards. Sorry, Chiron winced, regaining his balance. Good catch, Percy. No problem, Percy said, picking up the scroll. As his fingers touched the parchment, a jolt of energy, not unlike the feeling of jumping into the ocean on a hot day, rushed through him. The iridescent surface shimmered more intensely for a moment, and Percy could have sworn he heard distant chimes. Chiron frowned. Did you feel that? Percy nodded, carefully rolling the scroll back up. Like a power surge, it recognized me somehow. That's concerning. Chiron stroked his beard. The scroll seems to have responded to your divine heritage. Perhaps it would be better if I can put it away, Percy said quickly, surprising himself with his reluctance to hand it over. I'll be careful, promise. Chiron hesitated, then nodded. Very well, but Percy, don't attempt to use it without supervision. Cross-Pantheon magic operates under different rules than what you're accustomed to. I'll just put it back in the box and leave it here. Percy assured him. Chiron gave him a look that said he didn't entirely believe this promise, but nodded. Come down for dinner when you've finished. After Chiron's hoofbeats receded down the stairs, Percy found himself alone with the scroll. He turned it over in his hands, studying the craftsmanship. The parchment felt both ancient and somehow timeless, and the mixed symbols seemed to shift subtly when he wasn't looking directly at them. What are you? He murmured. Logically, he knew he should just put it back. Magical objects with unclear purposes had a way of complicating his life. And he had enough complications. But something about this scroll felt right in his hands, like it had been waiting for him. Before he could reconsider, Percy slipped the scroll into his jacket pocket instead of returning it to the box. He would examine it more closely in the privacy of his cabin, then return it tomorrow. What was the harm in one night? Hey, RCY sat cross-legged on his bunk in cabin 3, the scroll unrolled before him. The Poseidon cabin was empty except for him. His younger half-brother Tyson was currently working in their father's underwater forges. Percy appreciated the solitude as he studied the mysterious object. In the better light of his cabin, with its softly glowing abalone shells and burbling fountain, Percy could see more details in the scroll's craftsmanship. The parchment itself seemed to be made of some material he couldn't identify, not quite paper, not quite fabric, with a subtle luminescence that reminded him of moonlight on water. The symbols were arranged in concentric circles around a central design that combined what looked like a trident with a stylized lightning bolt, not Zeus's master bolt, but something with a different energy. Between the circles of text were illustrations of women in flowing robes, some with Greek features and others clearly Asian in appearance. All had an otherworldly quality to them. So you're some kind of pantheon collaboration, Percy murmured, tracing the patterns with his finger. But what do you do? As if in response, the scroll warmed beneath his touch, the symbols beginning to glow faintly. Percy jerked his hand back, but curiosity quickly overcame caution. He leaned closer, studying the now illuminated text. Some of the Greek letters formed words he could actually read now: binding, covenant, and divine union appeared repeatedly. The Japanese characters remained indecipherable to him, but they pulsed with energy that felt like spring storms and flowing water. Divine union, Percy repeated thoughtfully, like a treaty between pantheons. He touched one of the illustrated female figures, a woman with flowing blue-black hair who seemed to be emerging from ocean waves. As his finger made contact, the illustration shimmered, and Percy felt a strange pull, as if the woman were trying to reach back through the parchment to touch him. A sudden sharp pain made him gasp. He'd given himself a paper cut on the scroll's edge. A drop of his blood fell onto the parchment, and instead of staining it, the blood seemed to be absorbed, disappearing completely. That's not normal, Percy muttered, sticking his finger in his mouth. The scroll began to glow more intensely, the symbols rearranging themselves before his eyes. The central design expanded, the trident and lightning bolt merging into a swirling vortex. The illustration of the water woman grew larger, her features becoming more defined as she seemed to rise from the parchment itself. Whoa! Percy scrambled backward on his bunk as the scroll levitated, hanging suspended in midair. The cabin filled with the scent of ocean spray and cherry blossoms, an odd but not unpleasant combination. The temperature dropped, and mist began to form around the floating scroll, coalescing into a human shape. Percy uncapped Riptide, his celestial bronze sword springing to full length in his hand. He'd seen enough magical manifestations to know to be prepared for anything. The mist solidified, becoming a young woman standing at the foot of his bunk. She had long, flowing blue-black hair that seemed to move as though underwater, even though she stood on solid ground. Her eyes were the deep blue-green of the ocean at its most mysterious depths. She wore a kimono-like garment of shifting blues and whites that appeared to be made of water itself, flowing around her slender form. The woman blinked, looking around the cabin with evident surprise before her gaze settled on Percy. She spoke, her voice melodious but in a language Percy couldn't understand, Japanese, he guessed. Percy lowered Riptide slightly, though he didn't recap it yet. Hi, do you speak English by any chance? The woman tilted her head, considering him. Then she closed her eyes, seeming to concentrate. When she opened them again, she spoke in accented but clear English. I am Mizuki, daughter of rivers, guardian of sacred waters. You have activated the scroll of divine covenant. She gave a small, formal bow. Are you the one who seeks divine union? Percy blinked. Divine what now? I just found this scroll in the camp attic. Mizuki frowned slightly. The scroll does not activate by accident. Your blood freely given, your divine heritage recognized, the covenant has begun. Wait. Percy held up his free hand. Covenant. I didn't agree to any covenant. I just got a paper cut. A smile flickered across Mizuki's face, there and gone so quickly Percy almost missed it. Blood speaks truth even when intentions do not. The scroll has recognized you as worthy. Worthy of what, exactly? Percy asked, growing increasingly concerned about what he might have accidentally initiated. Mizuki gestured to the still floating scroll. The scroll of divine covenant was created in the time of great meeting, when the gods of many lands convened to establish boundaries and alliances. It allows a mortal of divine blood to summon compatible divine partners, forming bonds that strengthen both mortal and immortal. Partners. Bonds. Percy's mind was racing, trying to process her explanation. Like marriage. Mizuki nodded solemnly. A form of divine marriage, yes. But more than your mortal understanding of the concept. A sharing of essence, of power, of purpose. Percy sat down hard on his bunk, finally recapping Riptide. Oh gods, I accidentally got engaged to a Japanese water spirit. This time, Mizuki's smile remained, transforming her solemn beauty into something warmer. Not engaged yet, son of Poseidon. The covenant begins with summoning, then progresses through stages of understanding and acceptance before culminating in true union. I am merely the first to answer your call. First, Percy echoed weakly. How many are there? The scroll permits 20 divine partners from compatible pantheons, Mizuki explained, as calmly as if discussing the weather. Each bringing unique powers and perspectives to the covenant holder. Percy ran a hand through his hair, trying to wrap his mind around this. So this scroll is basically mythological daddy. Ing app that can summon 20 divine wives. And I activated it by bleeding on it. Mizuki looked puzzled by his terminology but nodded. In essence, yes. Though the bonds formed are far deeper than mortal courtship. They are unions of divine power and purpose. And I'm guessing I can't just undo this. Percy asked hopefully. The covenant, once begun, must be either completed or formally renounced, Mizuki said. But renunciation carries its own consequences. Of course it does, Percy muttered. Just once, he'd like magical objects to come with simple on-off switches and no dire consequences. Mizuki moved closer. Her movements fluid and graceful. Up close, Percy noticed that her skin had a subtle blue undertone, and tiny droplets of water occasionally formed and ran down her arms, disappearing back into her flowing garments. You are troubled, she observed. This was not your intention. No offense, Percy said quickly, but I generally like to know what I'm signing up for before I sign up for it. None taken, Mizuki replied, her voice gentler now. Many covenant holders throughout history have been surprised by their calling. But the scroll chooses worthy vessels. Those with the capacity to honor and sustain such bonds. Why me, though? Percy asked. I'm not exactly in the market for 20 divine wives. Mizuki sat on the edge of his bunk, her form cozy. No depression in the mattress despite her solid appearance. The scroll responds to need as much as worthiness. Perhaps there is a purpose you have yet to recognize. Before Percy could respond, a knock came at the cabin door. Percy, Annabeth's voice called. You missed dinner. Are you okay? Percy froze, looking between Mizuki and the door. How exactly did one explain the sudden appearance of a Japanese water spirit who was apparently his divine covenant partner? Just a minute, he called, then whispered urgently to Mizuki, can other people see you? I am as real as you are, Mizuki replied. Though I can conceal myself if you wish. That might be, Percy began, but the door was already opening. Annabeth Chase stood in the doorway, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Gray eyes instantly taking in the scene before her. Those eyes widened as they fixed on Mizuki. Percy, she said carefully, who is this? Percy had faced monsters, titans, and giants with less trepidation than he felt trying to explain the current situation to his ex-girlfriend. He and Annabeth had broken up amicably 2 years ago, realizing they worked better as friends than partners, but this was still going to be awkward. This is Mizuki, he said, then added somewhat lamely, she's a Japanese water spirit. I see. Annabeth stepped fully into the cabin, closing the door behind her. And she's in your cabin because... Mizuki rose, giving Annabeth a respectful bow. I have been summoned through the scroll of divine covenant. Percy Jackson is the chosen vessel. Annabeth's gaze snapped to the still floating scroll, her expression shifting from confusion to recognition to alarm. Percy, please tell me you didn't activate an ancient cross-pantheon binding artifact. In my defense, Percy said, it was a paper cut. Annabeth closed her eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. When she opened them, she fixed Percy with her best. You've really done it now, look. We need to tell Chiron. I was going to, Percy protested, as soon as I figured out what was going on. Annabeth walked over to examine the scroll, careful not to touch it. The scroll of divine covenant. I've read references to it. It's supposed to be a myth even among myths. You know about it? Percy asked, surprised. Only in theory, Annabeth admitted. It was created during a rare convergence of pantheons thousands of years ago. A tool to forge alliances through divine unions. She turned to Mizuki. You're really a kami from Japanese mythology. Mizuki nodded. I am a Mizuchi, a water dragon spirit in your terms. Though my form is typically human. Fascinating, Annabeth murmured, her academic curiosity temporarily overriding her concern. So the scroll creates bonds between a demigod and divine beings from compatible pantheons. Yes, Mizuki confirmed. The covenant holder may summon up to 20 divine partners, forming bonds that strengthen all involved. 20. Annabeth raised an eyebrow at Percy. I didn't know. Percy held up his hands defensively. I was just looking at it, got a paper cut, and suddenly I've got a divine dating profile. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Annabeth's lips twitched with the hint of a smile. Only you, seaweed brain. The familiar nickname eased some of the tension in Percy's shoulders. If Annabeth could see humor in the situation, maybe it wasn't a complete disaster. So what happens now? He asked, looking between Annabeth and Mizuki. Now, Annabeth said firmly, we talk to Chiron. Cross-pantheon magic is serious business. Mizuki nodded in agreement. The centaur mentor is wise to be consulted. But be aware, now that the covenant has begun, others may take notice. Others? Percy asked. What others? The scroll's power does not go unnoticed in divine realms, Mizuki explained. Some may support your covenant journey. Others may seek to disrupt it, or claim the scroll's power for themselves. Great, Percy muttered. Another magical item that's going to make immortals want to kill me. Just what I needed. Is there any way to pause this process? Annabeth asked Mizuki. Give us time to understand what we're dealing with. Mizuki considered this. The covenant advances through deliberate action and mutual agreement. It cannot be forced or rushed. But now that it has begun, certain attention will be drawn regardless. Then we'd better move quickly, Annabeth decided. Percy, bring the scroll. We need to find Chiron. As Percy reached for the floating scroll, it responded to his touch. The glow dimming as it settled into his hands. He carefully rolled it closed, noticing that the illustrations had changed. The water woman who resembled Mizuki now appeared to be standing beside a figure that looked suspiciously like Percy himself. It records the progress of the covenant, Mizuki explained, seeing his surprise. Our meeting is now part of its history. Percy tucked the scroll into his jacket pocket, unsettled by the implications but unwilling to leave it behind. As they stepped outside into the evening air, he noticed Mizuki looking around with undisguised wonder. What's it like? He asked her quietly as Annabeth led the way toward the big house. Being summoned to a different world. Mizuki's eyes reflected the stars appearing overhead, making them seem impossibly deep. It is like emerging from the depths of a river into open air, disorienting yet exhilarating. I have observed your world from divine realms, but to walk within it is a gift. Her genuine appreciation for simply being here caught Percy off guard. He was so accustomed to immortals viewing the mortal world with disdain or, at best, detached amusement. "Well, welcome to Camp Half-Blood," he offered. "It's usually less weird than this. Sometimes." Mizuki's laugh was like water tumbling over stones. "I doubt that very much, Percy Jackson." Chiron took the news better than Percy expected, though the centaur's tail flicked anxiously as he paced the big house wreck room. "I should have been more careful with the artifact," he said, studying the scroll now laid open on the ping-pong table. "Cross-Pantheon magic is notoriously unpredictable." "It's my fault," Percy admitted. "I should have left it in the attic like I promised." Mizuki, who had been examining the room's strange collection of items with fascination, turned her attention back to the conversation. "The scroll chooses its moment of awakening. If not today, then soon. It has been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Percy asked. Mizuki gestured to the window, through which the camp's strawberry fields were visible in the moonlight. "Times of transition. The scroll awakens when boundaries between pantheons grow thin. When new alliances become necessary." Chiron stroked his beard thoughtfully. "There have been stirrings lately. Unusual monster activity, dreams reported by campers from multiple cabins." "You think something's coming?" Annabeth asked. "Something that would require cross-pantheon cooperation." "Perhaps," Chiron said cautiously. "Or perhaps the scroll simply recognized a worthy vessel in Percy. Divine magic often operates on multiple levels of purpose." Percy wasn't thrilled about being called a vessel, but he had more pressing concerns. "So what exactly does this covenant involve?" Mizuki mentioned 20 divine partners, which sounds. He trailed off, uncertain how to describe how it sounded. "Overwhelming," Annabeth suggested with a slight smirk. "I was going to say complicated," Percy replied. "But yeah, that too." Mizuki approached the table, her fluid movements drawing every eye. "The Scroll of Divine Covenant allows bonds between immortal of divine heritage and compatible immortal beings. Each bond strengthens both parties. The covenant holder gains aspects of their partner's divine domains, while the partners gain a deeper connection to the mortal realm." "And these bonds are marriages?" Chiron asked delicately. "Divine unions," Mizuki corrected. "Similar to marriage but more profound. A sharing of essence and purpose." Percy ran a hand through his hair. "And I'm supposed to form these unions with 20 different immortals? That seems excessive." "The number 20 is sacred in the combined numerologies of the participating pantheons," Mizuki explained. "Each union adds to the covenant's power and stability." "But why Percy?" Annabeth pressed. "Why now?" Mizuki's gaze settled on Percy, her deep blue eyes seeming to see more than just his physical form. "The scroll recognizes compatible souls, those with the capacity for multiple profound connections, those who can bridge worlds. As for the timing," she looked to the window again. "The heavens have aligned. Changes approach. Cryptic divine warnings," Percy muttered. "Just like old times." Chiron moved closer to examine the scroll. "These symbols along the outer ring, their protection wards against interference. Whoever created this expected opposition." "Yes," Mizuki confirmed. "Not all immortals approved of the covenant's creation. Some believe divine power should remain separate from the mortal realm, pantheons distinct and unmingled." "And what do you believe?" Percy asked her directly. Mizuki met his gaze steadily. "I believe boundaries can become prisons. I believe in the wisdom of connection." A small smile curved her lips. "And I have always been curious about what lies beyond my river's banks." Something in her honesty resonated with Percy. He'd spent years fighting for Olympus, for his friends, for the mortal world, but had he ever really found where he belonged between those worlds? "So what happens next?" he asked. "Am I supposed to start summoning more partners?" "The covenant advances at its own pace," Mizuki said. "Each summons will occur when conditions align, when you are ready, when they are willing, when the need arises." "But there will be consequences now that the process has begun," Chiron warned. "If this scroll is as powerful as it appears, its activation will not go unnoticed in divine realms." "What kind of consequences?" Annabeth asked, ever practical. "Interest from various pantheons," Chiron explained. "Both supportive and otherwise. There is one who has long sought the scroll's power," Mizuki said, her expression growing serious. "Susano." the storm god of Japanese mythology. He believes cross-pantheon power should belong to gods alone, not to mortals of divine blood. Susanoo, Percy repeated. Should I know this guy? Annabeth answered before Mizuki could. God of storms and the sea, known for his volatile temperament. Basically the Japanese equivalent of combining your dad with Zeus, with a dash of Ares thrown in for extra aggression. That sounds problematic, Percy said. An accurate if simplified assessment, Mizuki acknowledged with a nod to Annabeth. Susanoo has been contained within Japanese divine boundaries for centuries, but the scroll's activation may draw his attention outward. So not only do I have to figure out this whole divine covenant thing, Percy summarized, but I might have an angry storm god coming after me soon. Perhaps, Mizuki said, though the covenant itself offers protection as it grows stronger. Each bond reinforces the others, creating a network of divine support. Percy glanced at the scroll, still open on the table. This just gets better and better. Chiron placed a hand on Percy's shoulder. We will face these challenges as we have faced others, with preparation and courage. For tonight, I suggest rest. The morning may bring clearer perspective. What about Mizuki? Percy asked. Where will she stay? Chiron looked momentarily stumped by the logistics of housing a Japanese water spirit, but Mizuki solved the problem herself. I am bound to you through the covenant, but not confined to your presence, she explained to Percy. I can manifest when needed and retreat to water forms when not. Your camp's lake will be a suitable sanctuary for me to rest and observe. Percy nodded, relieved but also strangely disappointed. He'd only just met Mizuki, yet her presence felt right somehow, as if she filled a space he hadn't realized was empty. Then it's settled, Chiron declared. Percy, keep the scroll with you for now. Its connection to you appears established, and separating you might cause complications we don't yet understand. As they prepared to leave the big house, Annabeth pulled Percy aside while Chiron spoke quietly with Mizuki. How are you really doing with all this? She asked, her gray eyes searching his face. Percy gave a half-hearted laugh. Oh, you know, just another day in the life of Percy Jackson. Accidental activation of ancient magic, mysterious divine partners, angry gods. The usual. Annabeth wasn't fooled by his attempt at lightness. This is different from our usual quests. Percy. More personal. Yeah, he acknowledged, his smile fading. I don't know how to feel about any of it yet. I mean, Mizuki seems nice and everything, but divine unions. Multiple partners. It's not exactly what I planned for my future. Since when have our plans ever worked out? Annabeth pointed out with a wry smile. Fair point. Percy glanced over at Mizuki, who was listening intently to whatever Chiron was telling her. Even in the mundane setting of the rec room, surrounded by ping-pong paddles and ancient Greek pottery, she had an otherworldly grace that was mesmerizing. What do you think of her? Annabeth followed his gaze. She's not what I expected from a Japanese water spirit. More open-minded, less formal. And she seems genuinely interested in you, not just the covenant. Quote, you think so? Percy hadn't picked up on that subtlety. I do, Annabeth said. The way she watches you when you're not looking, she's curious about you specifically. Not just your role as covenant holder. Percy wasn't sure how to respond to that observation. This isn't going to be weird, is it? You and me and all this. Annabeth squeezed his arm reassuringly. Percy, we decided 2 years ago we work better as friends. I want you to be happy, whatever form that takes. Her expression turned thoughtful. Besides, I have a feeling you're going to need all the friends you can get if you're juggling multiple divine partners. That startled a genuine laugh out of Percy. When you put it that way. Just promise me one thing, Annabeth said, her tone turning serious. Be careful, not just with external threats, but with, she gestured vaguely toward his chest, your heart. Divine beings have different perspectives on relationships, on time, on commitment. I know, Percy said, touched by her concern. I'll be careful, and I'll keep you updated on every weird development. You'd better, Annabeth replied with a grin. This is too interesting to miss. Later that night, Percy sat on the dock extending into Camp Half-Blood's lake, his feet dangling just above the water's surface. The scroll lay unopened beside him, its presence a constant reminder of how quickly life could change direction. He wasn't alone for long. The water before him swirled, and Mizuki rose from the depths, water streaming from her form as she stepped onto the dock beside him. Her clothing had changed to a simpler blue robe, and her hair was adorned with small white flowers that seemed to glow in the moonlight. "The water here is clean," she said, settling gracefully beside him. "Strong nymphs tend it well. They'll be excited to meet you," Percy said. "We don't get many water spirits from other pantheons visiting." Mizuki smiled. "I have already introduced myself." They were most welcoming. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, looking out over the lake. The surface was mirror smooth, reflecting stars like scattered diamonds. "I sense your disquiet," Mizuki finally said. "You fear what the Covenant may bring." Percy appreciated her directness. "Wouldn't you? One minute I'm helping clean the attic, the next I'm bound to an ancient magical scroll with 20 divine marriages in my future and an angry storm god potentially hunting me down." "When you phrase it thus, it does sound rather overwhelming," Mizuki acknowledged with a gentle laugh. Percy smiled despite himself. "I've had weirder days, believe it or not. But this one ranks up there." "The Covenant is not a prison, Percy Jackson," Mizuki said after another moment of silence. "It is an invitation, one you may accept or decline at each stage. I would not wish an unwilling partner, nor would any worthy divine being." Percy turned to look at her directly. In the moonlight, she seemed both more solid and more ethereal, her edges blurring slightly into mist while her eyes remained piercingly clear. "Why did you answer the summons?" he asked. "You had a choice, right?" Mizuki nodded. "I did. Many might have ignored the call. But not you." "Why?" She looked out over the water, considering her answer. "For centuries, I have dwelled within my river, watching the mortal world change while divine realms remained stagnant. Humans build bridges, redirect waters, create new paths, always changing, adapting, connecting. Gods and spirits remain separate, isolated in our power and traditions." She turned back to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "I wished to build a bridge of my own." "Between divine and mortal?" Percy asked. "Between possibility and reality," Mizuki corrected. "Between what is and what might be." Her answer surprised him. He'd expected something about duty or power or divine plans, the usual motivations gods presented. Mizuki's desire for connection, for change, felt almost human. "Besides," she added with a small smile, "few mortals can truly understand water as you do, son of Poseidon." "I was curious. About me." Percy couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. "Your reputation reaches even to Japanese divine realms," Mizuki said. "The demigod who turned down immortality, who fell into Tartarus for love, who speaks to horses and controls the sea. Who would not be curious?" Percy felt his face warming. "Those stories probably exaggerate. Do they?" Mizuki's gaze was knowing. "I think not. Already I sense the truth of your character in our covenant bond. Courage tempered with compassion, power balanced by humility." Now Percy was definitely blushing. He redirected the conversation. "So this bond between us, what exactly does it do?" "It connects us," Mizuki explained, holding up her hand. Percy noticed a faint blue-green symbol on her palm, similar to the trident in the scroll's center. "Through this connection, aspects of my divine domain become accessible to you, while I gain a stronger presence in the mortal realm through you." "What aspects are we talking about?" Percy asked, genuinely curious now. Instead of explaining, Mizuki gestured to the lake's surface. "Show me what you can do with water, Percy Jackson." Percy shrugged and reached out with his senses, feeling the familiar tug in his gut as he connected with the lake. He raised his hand, and a column of water rose in response, twisting into a spiral before him. "Now," Mizuki said softly, "reach deeper. Feel beyond the water's movement to its essence." Percy frowned in concentration, trying to understand what she meant. He'd always controlled water by focusing on its physical properties, weight, momentum, direction. What was beyond that? "Close your eyes," Mizuki suggested. "Water is not just a substance to be moved. It is memory, it is life, it is connection." Percy closed his eyes, maintaining his hold on the water spiral but trying to sense what Mizuki described. At first, he felt nothing different, but then, a subtle shift in perception. The water wasn't just responding to his command. It was communicating with him. He could sense the history of each drop: rainfall, river journeys, evaporation and return. More than that, he could feel the life within it, microscopic organisms, dissolved minerals, oxygen molecules. I can feel everything in the water, he murmured, astonished. Every impurity, every living thing, every current and temperature variation. Yes, Mizuki's voice came from beside him. Pleased. This is water knowing, the deeper magic of water spirits. Movement and control are mere surface powers. True mastery lies in communion. Percy opened his eyes, still maintaining his new awareness. The spiral of water before him now shimmered with internal lights, highlighting the various elements he could sense within it. With a subtle shift in his perception, he could filter the water, purifying it to crystal clarity, or he could enhance certain minerals, changing its properties. Percy couldn't find adequate words. Amazing doesn't cover it. This is but one aspect of what our bond offers, Mizuki said. As the covenant grows, so too will the sharing of abilities. Percy gently lowered the water column back into the lake, feeling a new reverence for his father's domain. He'd always loved the ocean, always felt at home in water, but this deeper connection was something entirely new. Thank you for showing me that, he said sincerely. Mizuki inclined her head, accepting his thanks. The covenant benefits both sides, Percy Jackson. Already I feel more firmly anchored in this realm than I have in centuries of occasional visits. Your connection to the mortal world strengthens mine. Is that why the scroll allows multiple partners? Percy asked. More connections, more strength. Partly, Mizuki confirmed, but also for balance and completeness. No single divine domain encompasses all that existence offers. Through varied connections, the covenant holder becomes a nexus of balanced power. Percy picked up the scroll from beside him, looking at it with new appreciation. So each partner brings different abilities and perspectives. Yes, some will enhance what you already possess, as I do with water. Others will bring entirely new domains to your experience. The implications were simultaneously intimidating and exciting. Percy had always relied on his water abilities, but they had limitations. What might be possible with access to other divine domains? As if reading his thoughts, Mizuki cautioned, power is not the covenant's true purpose, however. Balance and understanding between realms, that is its deeper design. A sudden gust of wind swept across the lake, unusually strong and carrying the scent of rain. The clear night sky abruptly darkened as clouds appeared from nowhere, blotting out the stars. The water beneath the dock churned, small waves forming where moments before it had been still. Mizuki stood quickly, her expression alarmed. We are observed. By what? Percy was on his feet instantly, riptide appearing in his hand. Susano's awareness reaches toward us, Mizuki said, scanning the sky. The storm god senses the covenant's awakening. The wind intensified, whipping around them in circles. The clouds overhead began to spiral, forming the beginning of a funnel cloud directly above the lake. Is he attacking? Percy had to shout over the rising wind. Not yet, Mizuki called back. This is merely his attention turning toward us, a warning. The water of the lake was now churning violently, waves crashing against the dock's supports. Percy instinctively reached out with his power to calm it, only to find his influence countered by another force, wild, chaotic, and immensely powerful. I can't control the water, he shouted to Mizuki. He is a sea deity as well as storm, she explained, her own hands raised toward the turbulent water. His dominion overlaps with yours. Together, they managed to create a bubble of relative calm around the dock. But the rest of the lake continued to churn. Lightning flashed in the clouds above, followed by an explosive thunderclap that shook the dock beneath their feet. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the phenomenon ceased. The winds died, the clouds dispersed, and the lake's surface gradually settled back to stillness. Within minutes, it was as if nothing had happened, the stars once again reflected in peaceful waters. Percy looked at Mizuki, whose expression remained grave despite the dangers passing. What was that about? A message, she said quietly. Susano has noticed us, as I feared he might. That display was his way of saying he is watching. Friendly guy, Percy muttered, capping Riptide but keeping the pen in his hand. Is he going to do that every time we have a conversation? The hint of a smile returned to Mizuki's face. Unlikely. Such projections of power across pantheon boundaries require significant energy. He merely wished to make his awareness known. Consider me notified, Percy said. So what's his problem with the scroll exactly? Mizuki's expression grew thoughtful. Susanoo has always believed in the superiority of divine power over mortal. The scroll represents something he considers unnatural, the elevation of a mortal, even one with divine heritage, to a position of connection with multiple divine beings. He's jealous, Percy realized. In essence, yes, Mizuki agreed. Though he would never admit to such a mortal emotion. He would claim concern for cosmic order, for the proper hierarchy of power. Percy looked down at the scroll in his hand. So he wants this for himself. He cannot use it directly. The scroll was designed for those of mixed heritage, standing between mortal and divine worlds. But he would destroy it rather than see its power fulfilled in a mortal's hands. Of course he would, Percy sighed. Then a thought occurred to him. Wait, if he can sense when we use the scroll's power, does that mean he'll know every time I summon a new partner? Most likely, Mizuki confirmed. And each summoning may draw his attention more strongly, as the Covenant's power grows. So every step forward makes us a bigger target. Percy summarized. Perfect. Mizuki surprised him by placing her hand gently on his arm. Her touch was cool and soothing, like stepping into a shaded pool on a hot day. The Covenant brings challenges, yes. But it also brings strength through connection. Each bond formed creates protection as well as power. Her blue eyes met his steadily. You are not alone in this journey, Percy Jackson. That is the very essence of the Covenant's design. Percy found himself oddly reassured. He'd faced divine enemies before, always with friends by his side. Maybe this time wouldn't be so different. Just with a slightly more complicated relationship status. So what now? He asked. Now we rest, Mizuki said. Tomorrow, we begin to understand what the Covenant truly offers, and prepare for what comes next. And what does come next? Mizuki looked up at the stars, now clearly visible again. That depends partly on you, Percy Jackson. The Covenant responds to need, to readiness. When you are prepared for the next bond, the scroll will respond. Percy nodded, tucking the scroll safely back into his jacket. No pressure or anything. As they walked back toward the cabins, Percy found himself watching Mizuki from the corner of his eye. Just hours ago, she had been drawing on an ancient scroll. Now she walked beside him, a divine being who had chosen to answer his inadvertent summons. Who had already shown him a deeper connection to his own element. Maybe this Covenant, unexpected as it was, deserved a chance. After all, his life had never followed a conventional path. Why start now? The dream came to Percy as dreams often did for demigods, vivid, significant, and distinctly unrestful. He stood on a mountaintop shrouded in storm clouds, lightning flashing around him but never striking where he stood. Before him rose a massive torii gate, its red pillars stretching impossibly high into the churning sky. Beyond the gate, a figure waited in shadow. Visible only as a silhouette of wild hair and broad shoulders, surrounded by crackling energy. Son of Poseidon, a voice boomed, speaking in English but with an accent Percy couldn't place, ancient, powerful, and deeply irritated. You meddle with forces beyond your comprehension. Percy had enough experience with dream gods to know that showing fear rarely helped. Wasn't exactly intentional, he called back. But here we are. Quote, the shadowed figure seemed to grow larger. Lightning illuminating fierce eyes and a face contorted with displeasure. The scroll of divine covenant is not a toy for half-bloods to stumble upon. It is power meant for true divinity. If that were true, Percy countered, it wouldn't have responded to me. A crack of thunder emphasized the figure's growl of frustration. A design flaw I intend to correct. Relinquish the scroll, son of Poseidon, or face consequences beyond your mortal imagination. Percy crossed his arms. I don't respond well to threats. Just ask the last few gods who tried them. The figure stepped closer to the gate, and Percy could now make out more details. Traditional Japanese armor over a powerful frame, wild dark hair moving as though underwater. A sword crackling with lightning in one hand. I am Susanoo, god of storms and sea, slayer of the eight-headed serpent, brother to the sun. Your Greek heritage offers no protection in my domain. And yet, Percy observed, you're stuck behind that gate, talking instead of acting. If you were as all-powerful as you claim, wouldn't you have just taken the scroll already? The storm intensified around them. But Percy noticed something interesting. The gate between them appeared to be containing Susanoo's power, preventing it from fully reaching him. Some barrier was still in place, limiting the Japanese god's influence. The old boundaries weaken but have not yet fallen, Susanoo admitted, his voice like grinding stones. But the scroll's activation accelerates their dissolution. Soon, son of Poseidon, very soon, the barriers between pantheons will no longer protect you. By then, Percy said with more confidence than he felt, I won't need protection. The covenant works both ways, doesn't it? Every partner strengthens my position. If you live long enough to complete it, Susanoo snarled. Many covenant holders have failed before their final bonds were formed. Their bones fertilize my sacred mountains. Before Percy could respond, a new presence materialized beside him, Mizuki, her form more luminous in the dreamscape, trailing mist and weight. Are droplets that seemed to absorb the lightning around them. Lord Susanoo, she said, bowing formally but not subserviently. Your attention honors our covenant. Mizuchi, the storm god growled. Quote, you risk much by answering this mortal's summons. Return to your river and I may yet forgive this transgression. Mizuki straightened, her expression serene but resolute. The covenant has begun. I have made my choice freely, as is my right under the ancient accords. Foolish river spirit, Susanoo's voice dropped to a dangerous rumble. You pledge yourself to a doomed endeavor. Perhaps, Mizuki allowed, or perhaps to a new beginning that even you, great storm bringer, cannot foresee. Susanoo's laughter was like avalanches in distant mountains. We shall see which of us foresees true. His gaze shifted back to Percy. Enjoy your first bond, son of Poseidon. Savor it while you can. The scroll has awakened, and you are not the only one who can feel its pull across pantheons. The dream began to dissolve, the mountain and gate fading into mist. The last thing Percy saw was Susanoo's face, fierce and determined, mouth curved in a knowing smile that sent chills down Percy's spine. 20 bonds to complete, the storm god's voice echoed as the dream faded. 20 opportunities to fail, I need only succeed once. Percy woke with a jolt, sitting upright in his bunk. Dawn light filtered through the cabin's windows, casting an aquatic glow across the room. The dream remained vivid in his mind, unlike normal dreams that typically faded upon waking. Not just a dream, he murmured to himself, reaching for the scroll that he'd placed on his bedside table. It pulsed faintly with energy, responding to his touch. A soft knock at the cabin door preceded Mizuki's entrance. Shish. He looked exactly as she had in the dream, though her expression now held concern rather than the calm defiance she'd shown Susanoo. You saw him, she said simply. Percy nodded. Charming guy. Loves to make first impressions with threats and lightning. Dream walking is one of his talents, Mizuki explained, sitting at the foot of Percy's bunk. He can project his awareness across boundaries that his physical form cannot yet cross. Quote, yet, Percy repeated. He seemed pretty confident that was going to change soon. The barriers between pantheons have been thinning for centuries, Mizuki confirmed. The scroll's activation accelerates this process, both a consequence and purpose of its design. Percy ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the implications. So activating the scroll is basically unlocking doors between mythological worlds. That seems potentially catastrophic. Not unlocking, Mizuki corrected, but creating controlled pathways. The covenant forms DGES where there were walls, selective connections rather than collapse. And Susanoo wants to exploit those connections, Percy guessed. He is not alone in that desire, Mizuki said gravely. NY divine beings view changing boundaries with either fear or opportunism. The scroll represents controlled change, evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Those who prefer chaos or rigid separation equally oppose it. Percy studied the scroll in his hands. He said I wasn't the only one who could feel the scroll's pull. What did he mean by that? Mizuki's expression grew troubled. The scroll calls to compatible divine beings across pantheons, those who might form bonds with the covenant holder. But that call can be sensed by others as well, those who wish to disrupt the covenant or claim its power. So we have a storm god gunning for us, potentially other hostile immortals taking notice, and 20 divine bonds to form before the covenant is complete and stable, Percy summarized. Just another Tuesday for Percy Jackson. Quote, his attempt at humor brought a small smile to Mizuki's face. You face adversity with remarkable equanimity. Percy shrugged. I've had practice. So what's our next move? Mizuki seemed pleased by his use of our rather than my. We strengthen what has begun. Our bond is new, still forming. The deeper our connection grows, the stronger foundation it provides for what follows. And how do we do that exactly? Percy asked, suddenly feeling out of his depth. Battling monsters was one thing. Developing a mystical bond with a divine water spirit was quite another. Through understanding, Mizuki said simply, show me your world, Percy Jackson, and allow me to show you aspects of mine. The request was so straightforward, so free of hidden agendas or cryptic prophecies, that Percy found himself smiling. I can do that. Camp tour after breakfast. I would like that very much, Mizuki agreed. As Percy prepared for the day, he found himself observing Mizuki with new interest. She explored his cabin with genuine curiosity, asking about photographs, examining his limited personal possessions, running her fingers over the saltwater fountain in the corner with evident delight. This wasn't how Percy had expected to start his day, or the next chapter of his life. An ancient magical scroll, a divine water spirit, 20 mystical bonds to form, and an angry storm god sending dream threats, it should have been overwhelming. And yet, watching Mizuki's simple joy in discovering his world, Percy felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, anticipation. After years of fighting defensive battles, of responding to threats and prophecies, maybe this was a chance to build something new. Something that wasn't just about preventing destruction, but creating connection. The scroll hummed softly in his pocket as they stepped outside into the morning light, almost like an affirmation. Whatever came next, divine partners, hostile gods, mystical bonds, at least it wouldn't be boring. And for Percy Jackson, that was saying something. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Storm Warning. Camp Half-Blood looked different through Mizuki's eyes. As Percy led her around the familiar grounds, he found himself seeing details he'd long since stopped noticing. The perfect blue of the sky above the magically controlled weather, the intricate craftsmanship of the cabins representing different gods, the vibrant life in the woods and fields. Your campers train as warriors from such young ages, Mizuki observed as they passed the arena W. Here a group of Ares children were practicing sword techniques under Clarice's critical eye. Demigod life expectancy isn't great without training, Percy explained. Most of us start getting attacked by monsters once we hit puberty. Camp is as much about survival as education. Mizuki's expression grew solemn. In Japan, kami often protect humans rather than endanger them. Though there are certainly malevolent spirits as well. Must be nice, Percy said wryly. Here, even the friendly gods occasionally send monsters to test their children. They continued walking, drawing curious stares from campers. News of Mizuki's arrival had spread quickly, and Percy could hear the whispers following them. By lunchtime, he was sure the rumors would have him engaged to 20 different goddesses with a divine war brewing. Camp gossip made the Olympian grapevine look positively restrained. Percy. Grover's voice called from the direction of the strawberry fields. The satyr trotted toward them, his reed pipes dangling from one hand. He'd grown a respectable beard in recent years, and his horns had developed into impressive spirals. As Lord of the Wild, he split his time between camp and his conservation efforts worldwide. Hey, G-Man, Percy greeted him with a grin. When did you get back? Late last night, Grover replied, slightly out of breath from his sprint. Juniper told me, you'd gotten yourself into another mythological mess. His eyes shifted curiously to Mizuki. As this, Mizuki, Japanese water spirit, Percy introduced. Mizuki, this is Grover Underwood, Lord of the Wild and my oldest friend. Grover blushed at the title but extended his hand to Mizuki, who regarded it with interest before gently shaking it. I've never met a kami before, he said, obvious fascination in his voice. Your nature energy feels different from our nymphs. As yours differs from our nature spirits, Mizuki replied with a smile. Though we share devotion to the wild places. Grover beamed at this common ground. Exactly. I'd love to hear about Japanese wilderness protection sometime. Do you have something similar to the Council of Cloven Elders? Percy recognized the beginning of what could be an hours-long ecological discussion and gently redirected. Grover, did Chiron fill you in on the scroll situation? Some of it, Grover said, his expression growing more serious. Cross-Pantheon magic, divine partners, angry storm gods, you know, the usual Percy Jackson vacation plan. Percy snorted. Believe me, this wasn't on my summer agenda. The Covenant was destined to reawaken. Mizuki interjected. If not through Percy, then another. Well, better you than most, Grover told Percy loyally. If anyone can handle 20 divine partners without letting it go to their head, it's you. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Percy said. Though I'm still wrapping my mind around the whole concept. The empathy link between you two is strong, Mizuki observed, looking between Percy and Grover with interest. I can sense its resonance. Grover nodded. Percy saved my life years ago. We've had a connection ever since. Such bonds between mortal and immortal are rare in my experience. Mizuki said thoughtfully. Perhaps this is why the scroll chose you, Percy Jackson. You already understand connection across different realms of existence. Percy hadn't considered that angle. His friendships with Grover, with the Cyclops Tyson, with various minor gods and nature spirits, they had always seemed natural to him, not particularly remarkable. But maybe they were less common than he'd assumed. Speaking of connections, Grover said, lowering his voice, word from the nymphs is that there was some kind of magical disturbance at the lake last night. Supernatural storm activity, anything to do with your new situation. Susano, Mizuki confirmed before Percy could speak. The storm god has taken notice of the Covenant's activation. Grover paled slightly beneath his tan. That's not great. Japanese storm gods aren't exactly known for their reasonable temperaments. Neither are Greek ones, Percy pointed out. But we've dealt with divine temper tantrums before. This may be different, Grover warned. Cross-Pantheon conflicts operate under complicated rules. If Susano finds a way around the ancient boundaries, we'll be ready, Percy said with more confidence than he felt. In the meantime, we're focusing on strengthening this first bond. He gestured between himself and Mizuki. Grover's expression softened. Well, if you need anything, music to soothe divine tempers, nature surveillance, moral support, you know where to find me. Thanks, G-Man. Percy clapped him on the shoulder. Actually, there is something. Has Chiron mentioned any plans for a council meeting about this? I figure the head counselors should probably know what's happening. Tonight after dinner, Grover confirmed. He's calling. In some of the older campers too. Annabeth's already here, and he's sent messages to Talia and Nico. Percy nodded, grateful for Chiron's foresight. Having his most experienced friends on hand would help, especially with the complications of cross-Pantheon politics. After Grover trotted off to return to his duties, Percy and Mizuki continued their tour, ending at the beach, Percy's favorite place at camp. And clearly a draw for Mizuki as well. Her entire demeanor changed as they approached the water, her movements becoming even more fluid, her blue-black hair lifting slightly as if underwater despite the lack of wind. Your father's domain, she said, gazing out over the sound. I can feel his power here, intertwined with yours. Percy nodded, feeling the familiar tug of the ocean in his veins. He doesn't visit much, but his presence is always in the water. It is similar with the greater kami in Japan, Mizuki said. They manifest rarely, but their essence permeates their domains. She looked at Percy curiously. May I ask something personal? Sure, Percy replied, surprised by her hesitancy. She had been direct until now. In your world, how do the children of gods feel about their divine parents? I sense complexity in your relationship with Poseidon. The question caught Percy off guard. It wasn't something he discussed often, even with close friends. It's complicated, he admitted. Most demigods have issues with our godly parents. They're not exactly involved in our lives, and when they do show up, it's usually because they need something. He tossed a stone into the water. Watching the ripples spread. With my dad, it's better than most. He's shown up at critical moments, helped when he could within the rules. I know he cares in his way. But there's always this distance. This sense that I'm just one of many mortal children in a very long existence. Mizuki listened intently, her expression thoughtful. Among kami, offspring are rarer. but often similarly distant from their progenitors. Divine perspective makes mortal lifespans seem fleeting. Exactly, Percy said, feeling oddly relieved that she understood. It's hard to have a normal parent-child relationship with someone who's existed for millennia and will continue existing long after you're gone. And yet, Mizuki observed, you've accomplished much that has earned divine respect. Your deeds are known even in Japanese divine realms. Percy shrugged uncomfortably. I did what needed doing, mostly to protect my friends in the mortal world. I wasn't looking for divine approval. Perhaps that is precisely why you have earned it, Mizuki said with a smile. Those who seek godly favor rarely deserve it. Those who act from genuine conviction often do. They walked along the shoreline. Comfortable silence settling between them. Percy found it strange how natural Mizuki's presence felt after just one day. There was none of the awkwardness he usually experienced with new acquaintances. Divine or otherwise. Yesterday, Percy said eventually, you showed me that deeper connection to water, the water knowing. Are there other aspects of your abilities that the Covenant might share with me? Mizuki seemed pleased by his interest. Many water spirits possess numerous gifts beyond control of our element. We can breathe life into reflections, speak through flowing water across vast distances, purify corruption, heal certain injuries, even step between bodies of water that share a connection. Like water travel? Percy asked, intrigued. He'd seen Hi's father dissolve into sea spray and reappear elsewhere, but had never managed the technique himself. Similar, though more limited, Mizuki explained. I cannot manifest anywhere as Poseidon might. I must travel between waters that touch, rivers that meet, seas that connect, even morning dew that will eventually flow to the same destinations. Still sounds incredibly useful, Percy said, eyeing the tactical advantages of such movement. It requires practice, Mizuki cautioned. But yes, the Covenant will gradually open such possibilities to you. Percy was about to ask more when he noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon, too rapidly to be natural. The previously calm surface of the Sound began to churn with sudden, choppy waves. Trouble? He asked, already reaching for Riptide in his pocket. Mizuki's expression grew concerned as she studied the approaching storm. Perhaps, but different from last night's manifestation. This has purpose, direction. The storm front accelerated toward them, crossing miles in seconds, unnatural in its speed and formation. Unlike a normal thunderstorm, it maintained a distinct shape, almost like a massive hand reaching toward the shore. Wind whipped suddenly around them, carrying salt spray and the scent of ozone. We should return to camp, Mizuki urged, her hair and clothing rippling with increasing agitation. This is a direct sending, not merely observation. They turned to head back toward the cabins, but the storm moved faster. Dark clouds engulfed the sky above them, plunging the beach into premature twilight. Lightning crackled through the air, striking the sand in a circle around them, cutting off their retreat. Too late, Percy muttered, uncapping Riptide. The celestial bronze blade glowed in the unnatural darkness. The waves before them rose, forming a towering wall of water at least 20 feet high. Unlike Percy's controlled water manipulations, this was wild, chaotic, filled with debris and churning foam. The wall parted in the center, creating a corridor of open air extending out into the Sound. A figure walked through this corridor toward them, his feet barely touching the surface of the water. He appeared to be a man in his prime, powerfully built, with wild black hair that moved as though underwater despite being dry. He wore traditional Japanese armor in shades of deep blue and storm gray, lightning occasionally crackling across its surface. His face was handsome but fierce, with eyes that shifted between sea green and thundercloud gray. Susano, Mizuki whispered, instinctively moving closer to Percy. An aspect of him, Percy realized aloud. Not his full manifestation. Having encountered various forms of gods before, Percy recognized the difference between a god's true divine form and a projected aspect. Perceptive, son of Poseidon, the figure said, his voice carrying easily over the wind and waves. I cannot yet cross pantheon boundaries in my full glory. But this sending is sufficient for our first official meeting. Percy kept Riptide ready but didn't take an aggressive stance. Starting a fight with even an aspect of a major storm god on a beach probably wasn't the wisest move. Lord Susano, Percy acknowledged with minimal respect. Can't say the dramatic entrance was necessary. A simple, hello, would have worked. The storm god's aspect smiled, though it held no warmth. Familiarity breeds contempt, they say. I prefer to make my power clear from the outset. Message received, Percy said dryly. What do you want? Susanoo's gaze shifted to Mizuki, who had composed herself and now stood straight backed beside Percy. Mizuki, your absence from your river has been noted. I have not abandoned my duties, Mizuki replied calmly. The waters remember me still. Yet you bind yourself to this. Susanoo gestured dismissively at Percy, half-divine mortal. A waste of your gifts. I disagree, Mizuki said simply. The Covenant offers new possibilities for connection between realms. Something many of us have long desired. Susanoo's expression darkened, lightning flashing in his eyes. Possibility, yes, but not like this, not through him. He turned his attention back to Percy. The scroll of divine covenant was a mistake, divine power diluted through mortal vessels. It should have remained buried in obscurity. And yet here we are, Percy countered. If the scroll chose me, maybe there's a reason beyond your understanding. The storm god laughed, a sound like thunder rolling across mountains. Your Greek arrogance is showing, boy. You think yourself special because you've faced a few titans. Because Olympus favors you, you know nothing of true divine power. I know enough, Percy replied evenly. I know gods who rule through fear aren't half as powerful as they pretend to be. Wind lashed around them, sand stinging Percy's face as Susanoo's anger manifested in the elements. Careful, son of Poseidon. Even in this limited form, I could erase you from existence. But you won't, Percy observed, maintaining his outward calm despite his racing heart. Because something's holding you back. Rules, boundaries, limitations, something you can't break yet. Susanoo's aspect flickered slightly, confirming Percy's guess. The ancient accords still stand, barely. Cross-pantheon interference remains, restricted. But the scroll's activation weakens those very restrictions with each new bond formed. So why are you here? Percy pressed. Just to make threats you can't back up. To offer a choice, Susanoo said. His voice suddenly reasonable, which Percy found far more concerning than his anger. Renounce the covenant now, return the scroll to dormancy, and I will ensure you and your camp remain untouched when the boundaries eventually fall. And if I refuse, Susanoo smiled thinly, then pray you complete all 20 bonds before I find a way to reach you directly. Because when I do, and I will, son of Poseidon, I will not be as merciful as your Greek gods. We of the Japanese pantheon remember how to truly punish presumption. Percy had been threatened by gods before, but Samet. Hingin Susanoo's cold certainty sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the storm. Still, he'd never responded well to divine intimidation. Thanks for the offer, Percy said, but I'll take my chances with the covenant. Beside him, Mizuki spoke up. Lord Susanoo, the covenant follows ancient rules that even you must respect. It cannot be broken without consequences for all pantheons. Rules change, Susanoo responded dismissively, especially when new powers enter the playing field. He fixed Percy with a penetrating stare. Consider carefully, son of Poseidon. The covenant may promise power, but it brings enemies from pantheons your Greek training has not prepared you to face. With that ominous warning, the aspect began to dissolve, becoming one with the storm around them. The wall of water collapsed back into the sound, the lightning ceased, and within moments, the unnatural clouds dispersed as quickly as they had formed. Percy and Mizuki stood alone on the beach once more, the only evidence of the confrontation being a circle of scorched sand where lightning had struck. Well, Percy said after a moment, recapping Riptide, he seems nice. Mizuki gave him a sidelong look. Your tendency toward humor in dangerous situations is unusual. It's a coping mechanism, Percy admitted. Better than panicking. True, she agreed, though you showed little sign of panic. Few would stand their ground before Susanoo's aspect so steadily. Percy shrugged. I've had practice with angry gods. But I'm more concerned about what he said regarding other pantheons. How many divine beings might have issues with this covenant? Mizuki's expression grew serious. The scroll's creation was controversial even in ancient times. Some from every pantheon opposed it, fearing disruption to established power structures. Others supported it, believing exchange between divine realms could strengthen all. And which side was stronger? It varied by pantheon, Mizuki explained. Among the Greek gods, I believe Athena and Hermes supported it, while Zeus and Ares opposed. In Japanese tradition, Amaterasu the sun goddess approved, while Susanoo clearly did not. So I should expect opposition from multiple directions, Percy summarized. Yes, Mizuki confirmed, but also support from unexpected quarters. The Covenant's awakening shifts divine pole. Edicts in ways even immortals cannot fully predict. Percy looked out over the now calm water, considering this new layer of complication. We should get back to camp. If Susanoo could send an aspect here, others might too. Better to be where we have backup. As they walked back toward the cabins, Percy found himself studying Mizuki with new eyes. She had stood firm beside him against Susanoo, owing no inclination to accept the storm god's implicit offer of clemency by abandoning the covenant. Thank you, he said suddenly. Mizuki gave him a questioning look. For sticking with me back there, Percy clarified. You could have changed your mind when Susanoo showed up. No one would have blamed you. The covenant is not entered lightly, Mizuki said simply. I made my choice knowing there would be opposition. A small smile curved her lips. Besides, your response to divine threats is refreshingly direct. Most mortals grovel or flee. I've never been great at groveling, Percy admitted. It just makes gods think they can push you around more. Mizuki's laugh was like water over smooth stones. A dangerous philosophy, but not an incorrect one. They had nearly reached the sea. Aben area when Percy spotted Annabeth waiting on the porch of cabin 3, her expression alert. She stood as she saw them approaching. There you are, she called. Chiron's called an emergency meeting at the big house. Something about divine energy signatures being detected at the beach. Yeah, we just had a nice chat with Susanoo, Percy confirmed. Or an aspect of him, anyway. Annabeth's eyes widened. The storm god manifested here. That's unprecedented. The boundaries between pantheons must be weaker than we thought. It wasn't a full manifestation, Mizuki clarified. Merely a sending, a projection of presence rather than true divine form. Still, Annabeth insisted, for any aspect of a non-Greek deity to appear within camp borders is concerning. The magical protections should prevent that. Percy frowned, realizing she was right. Camp Half-Blood's boundaries were designed to keep out unwanted supernatural entities. Maybe the protections are specifically calibrated for Greek threats. Or perhaps, Mizuki suggested, the Covenant connection to me created a pathway Susanoo could exploit. My presence might have temporarily altered the camp's defenses. Either explanation was worrying. If camp wasn't safe from cross-pantheon threats, they had a serious vulnerability to address. We should get to that meeting, Percy decided. Chiron needs to know exactly what happened. The ping-pong table in the rec room was crowded with familiar faces when Percy, Annabeth, and Mizuki arrived. Chiron stood at the head of the table in centaur form, his tail flicking with evident concern. Around the table sat the senior counselors from each cabin, along with a few notable additions. Talia Grace, Lieutenant of Artemis, her silver circlet gleaming in her spiky black hair. Nico D'Angelo, son of Hades. Somehow looking both 16 and ancient simultaneously. Grover, nervously chewing on a tin can. And Rachel Elizabeth Dare, the camp's oracle, her curly red hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Conversations hushed as they entered, all eyes turning to examine Mizuki with undisguised curiosity. Ah, Percy, Annabeth, Chiron greeted them. And Mizuki, please join us. We were just discussing the magical disturbance detected at the beach. Percy took a seat, Mizuki gracefully settling beside him. That would be Susanoo, Japanese storm god. He sent an aspect to deliver some friendly threats and a generous offer to destroy me later rather than sooner if I give up the scroll. Murmurs broke out around the table. Chiron stamped a hoof for silence. This is grave news, the centaur said. For a deity from another pantheon to project even an aspect within our borders suggests the barriers between mythological worlds are weakening faster than anticipated. Isn't that supposed to happen? Clarice Leroux, daughter of Ares, asked bluntly. Percy said this scroll thing is all about connecting pantheons. In a controlled manner, Chiron clarified. He scroll of divine covenant was designed to create specific, limited connections through its chosen vessel. What concerns me is Susanoo's ability to manifest independently, suggesting a more general weakening of boundaries. Could someone explain exactly what this covenant entails? Talia requested, her electric blue eyes fixed on Percy. All I got was Artemis's message saying Percy had activated ancient magic and needed backup. Percy looked to Mizuki, who nodded encouragingly. With her help, he explained everything they knew about the scroll, the covenant, and the 20 divine bonds it was designed to create. As he spoke, he could see expressions around the table shifting from confusion to varying degrees of concern, skepticism, and in a few cases, poorly concealed amusement. Let me get this straight, Talia said when he finished. You accidentally activated magic that's going to connect you to 20 divine females from different pantheons, creating some kind of mystical marriage bond with each of them. That's basically it, yeah, Percy admitted. Talia stared at him for a moment, then burst out laughing. Only you, Percy, only you could stumble into becoming a divine harem protagonist. Percy felt his face heating. It's not like that. The covenant is about power balance and cross-pantheon connection, not whatever you're thinking. The lieutenant of Artemis raises a fair point. Though perhaps inelegantly, Chiron intervened. The covenant's nature does create complex, personal dynamics that could complicate our situation. The bonds formed through the covenant transcend mere mortal concepts of relationship, Mizuki explained, her calm voice drawing everyone's attention. They are connections of divine essence, of shared power and purpose. He translation to marriage is an imperfect approximation of a more profound concept. Still sounds like a harem to me, Talia muttered, though her smile had softened to show she was mostly teasing. What interests me, Annabeth interjected, steering the conversation to more practical matters, is how this affects camp security. If Susanoo could send an aspect here, are we vulnerable to other cross-pantheon threats? A valid concern, Chiron agreed. Our magical boundaries were designed specifically against Greek and Roman threats, with some adaptation for primordial entities after the war with Gaia. They may need reinforcement against deities from other mythological traditions. I might be able to help with that, Nico spoke up for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying clearly. The boundaries between life and death are similar across pantheons. My father has connections with death gods from other traditions. I could ask him about strengthening our defenses. Chiron nodded gratefully. An excellent suggestion, Nico. Please do consult with Lord Hades at your earliest convenience. What about the scroll itself? Rachel asked, her green eyes focused intently on the object now sitting on the table before Percy. Does it have any built-in protections? It was designed for cross-pantheon interaction, after all. All eyes turned to Mizuki, who considered the question carefully. The scroll creates a protective network through the covenant bonds, she explained. Each divine connection strengthens the holder against interference from hostile immortals. But with only one bond established. She looked apologetically at Percy. The protection is limited at present. So Percy needs to speed up this bonding process, Connor Stoll concluded with a mischievous grin. Better start shopping for divine engagement rings, Jackson. Percy shot him an exasperated look. It's not that simple. The scroll responds to readiness and need, not just because I decide to add more partners. Precisely, Mizuki confirmed. The covenant cannot be forced or rushed without compromising its integrity. Each bond must form naturally, with true understanding between parties. Which means Percy remains vulnerable in the meantime, Chiron summarized grimly. We must prepare additional protections. I have a more immediate question, Grover spoke up, nervously twisting his reed pipes. If Susanoo is already making moves, how long before he escalates beyond just sending aspects? What's his likely next step? Again, attention turned to Mizuki, who frowned thoughtfully. Susanoo is proud but strategic. He will not risk direct intervention while ancient accords still hold. More likely, he will seek proxies, lesser Japanese spirits loyal to him, or even mortal descendants who can act in this realm without violating divine restrictions. So we should expect attacks from Japanese monsters or demigods? Clarice asked, looking almost eager at the prospect of new opponents. Eventually, yes, Mizuki confirmed, though demigod is not quite the right term in Japanese tradition. The children of Kami are called Hitobashira, human pillars, and they are rare. often with different abilities than Greek demigods. Great, Percy sighed. So I've got hostile Japanese demigod equivalents to look forward to, on top of everything else. You're not facing this alone, Percy. Annabeth reminded him firmly. That's why we're all here. Nods of agreement around the table bolstered Percy's spirits. Whatever complications the Covenant brought, he still had his friends backing him up. There's one other possibility we should consider, Rachel said, her expression distant in the way it sometimes got when her oracle intuition was stirring. The scroll Su, Mon's divine partners from compatible pantheons, right? What if some of those potential partners are already known to us? A moment of silence followed as her implication sank in. Greek goddesses, Talia realized aloud. You think some of Percy's Covenant partners could be from our pantheon? Rachel nodded. It would make sense, given his heritage. The Covenant builds on existing connections and affinities. Percy hadn't considered that possibility. The idea of forming divine unions with goddesses he'd known for years, who had watched him grow up, felt strange, though perhaps no straw. Inger than bonding with deities from pantheons he'd never encountered before. If that's true, he said slowly, it could explain why Mizuki was the first to answer the summons. Water affinity, connect, Chion to my father's domain. The scroll started with the most compatible match. Mizuki inclined her head, acknowledging this reasoning. The Covenant typically begins with bonds that build upon the holder's existing strengths. Then expands to complementary domains. Which Greek goddesses would be most likely? Annabeth asked, her analytical mind clearly mapping possibilities. That would depend on Percy's affinity for their domains, Chiron mused. Though I hesitate to speculate on divine matters of this nature. Well, not Artemis, Talia stated categorically. Her vow of maidenhood is unbreakable. She paused, frowning slightly. At least, I've always been told it is. The Covenant transcends ordinary vows, Mizuki said carefully. It operates on divine laws that predate many pantheon-specific restrictions. However, she added, seeing Talia's alarmed expression, it cannot force unwilling participation. If a goddess's core nature truly prohibits such bonds, the scroll would not call to her. Percy tried not to look as uncomfortable as he felt with this line of discussion. The idea of forming divine connections with goddesses he knew was complicated enough without speculating about which ones might be compatible. Fortunately, Chiron seemed to sense his discomfort. These possibilities can be addressed as they arise. For now, our priority must be security and understanding the Covenant's immediate implications. He turned to Mizuki. What can Percy expect as the first bond strengthens? Are there specific stages or manifestations we should be aware of? Mizuki nodded, seeming grateful for the shift to more practical matters. The initial bond develops in phases. Already, Percy has experienced the first, water knowing, a deeper connection to my primary domain. Next typically comes dream sharing, allowing communication and knowledge transfer even when physically separated. That's useful, Percy noted, thinking of how often demigod dreams carried important information. After that, Mizuki continued, comes essence blending, a more profound sharing of abilities. Percy may temporarily manifest aspects of water spirit nature, while I gain greater solidity in the mortal realm. And the final phase, Chiron prompted when she paused. Soul recognition, Mizuki said softly. When the bond is complete, each party recognizes the other's essence as an extension of their own, separate yet connected, like two rivers that have joined while maintaining their individual courses. The poetic description resonated with Percy in an unexpected way. It didn't sound like the conventional marriage he'd initially feared, nor like the power grab he'd later suspected. It sounded like partnership, in the truest sense. How long does this process take? Annabeth asked. It varies, Mizuki admitted. Days, weeks, sometimes months, depending on the individuals involved and external circumstances. And once Percy completes the first bond with you, Rachel said, the scroll will call to the next potential partner. Yes, though overlapping bonds are possible, Mizuki explained. The next summons may occur before our bond reaches its final phase, especially if urgent need arises. Chiron stomped a hoof decisively. Then our course is clear. Percy and Mizuki will focus on strengthening their bond, while the rest of us prepare camp defenses against cross-pantheon threats. Nico will consult with his father about boundary reinforcement. Annabeth, research everything you can find about the Scroll of Divine Covenant and Japanese mythology, particularly regarding Susanoo. He continued assigning tasks. Talia would consult with Artemis about the Covenant's divine implications. Grover would alert nature spirits to watch for unusual activity. Rachel would meditate to see if her oracle abilities could provide insight into the Covenant's path. As for combat preparation, Chiron concluded, we should all expand our training to include techniques effective against non-Greek entities. Mizuki, would you be willing to instruct us in methods for confronting Japanese mythological threats? I would be honored, Mizuki agreed readily. Huff, I should note that my knowledge focuses primarily on water-affiliated entities. Any insight helps, Chiron assured her. We've faced unfamiliar adversaries before, but preparation always improves our odds. As the meeting dispersed, Percy felt simultaneously reassured by his friend's support and overwhelmed by the Covenant's implications. Talia caught up to him as he was leaving the big house, punching his arm lightly. So, 20 divine wives, huh? She teased, though her eyes were kind beneath the humor. Only you could turn finding a scroll in the attic into an interpantheon incident. Trust me, it wasn't planned, Percy replied ruefully. Talia's expression grew more serious. Planned or not, it's happening. And despite my jokes, I want you to know the hunters have your back. Artemis may have complicated feelings about this covenant, but she respects you. We'll be around if you need us. Thanks, Talia, Percy said, genuinely touched. That means a lot, she nodded, then glanced at Mizuki, who was speaking with Grover nearby. She seems different from most immortals. Less superior. She is, Percy agreed. More curious about connecting than commanding. It's refreshing. Well, if your first divine partner sets the tone, maybe this won't be the disaster I initially imagined, Talia admitted. Just be careful, Percy. Divine relationships have complications that make mortal ones look simple by comparison. I'm learning that quickly, Percy said wryly. Talia gave him one more friendly punch on the arm, then went to join Chiron for further discussion. Percy found himself momentarily alone, watching his friends disperse to their various assignments, all mobilizing to help him with a situation he'd stumbled into accidentally. The weight of the scroll in his pocket seemed heavier somehow, laden with responsibility. 20 divine bonds, cross-pantheon conflicts, ancient magic awakening, and at the center of it all, Percy Jackson. Who'd just been trying to help clean the camp attic. Your friends are loyal, Mizuki observed, appearing silently beside him. They offer support without hesitation, despite the unknown nature of the covenant. That's kind of our thing, Percy replied with a small smile. We've been through a lot together. It is a strength Susanoo underestimates, Mizuki said thoughtfully. Divine beings often discount mortal connections, seeing them as fleeting and fragile compared to immortal bonds. They fail to recognize that brevity often intensifies rather than diminishes commitment. Percy considered her words. Is that why you answered the scroll's call? To experience that kind of connection? Mizuki's eyes met his, deep blue and thoughtful. Perhaps. I have observed the mortal realm for centuries, watching connections form and dissolve. There is a beauty to mortal bonds precisely because they are not eternal. Each moment holds significance because it cannot be reclaimed. That's a surprisingly optimistic view of mortality from an immortal, Percy noted. Not all immortals scorn the mortal condition, Mizuki replied. Some of us envy certain aspects of it, the urgency, the appreciation for what might be lost. The constant renewal. Before Percy could respond to this unexpectedly philosophical turn, Annabeth approached, her arms full of books. Percy, I've pulled every thing from the Athena cabin's library that might be relevant, she announced. Ancient Japanese mythology, cross-pantheon magical theory, even some obscure references to the Scroll of Divine Covenant from Chiron's personal collection. Light reading for tonight, Percy joked, eyeing the stack dubiously. I'll help, Annabeth promised. But first, Chiron suggested you and Mizuki should continue working on strengthening your bond. Apparently there's a training area behind the armory that would give you privacy to practice water abilities without attracting attention. Percy nodded, grateful for Chiron's foresight. The last thing they needed was to advertise their activities to potential hostile observers. We'll head there now, he decided. Meet you at dinner to go through those books. Perfect, Annabeth agreed. As she turned to leave, she added, oh, and Percy. Try not to flood the camp this time. The Demeter kids are still upset about last summer's irrigation experiment. That was one time, Percy protested to her retreating back. He turned to Mizuki, who was watching with obvious amusement. It wasn't my fault the water pressure got away from me. Clarice distracted me with a spear to the back. I look forward to hearing more such stories, Mizuki said with a smile. They reveal much about your development as a water wielder. As they walked toward the training area, Percy found himself recounting some of his earlier, less successful attempts at water control, from accidental bathroom explosions to the time he nearly drowned the camp in a massive tidal wave during the Battle of the Labyrinth. Your power has always been intuitive rather than structured, Mizuki observed after listening. You feel the water rather than intellectualizing its behavior. This is a strength, though it sometimes lacks precision. That's a diplomatic way of saying I'm better at making big splashes than detailed water work, Percy translated with a self-deprecating smile. Perhaps, Mizuki acknowledged, but water knowing will change that. It allows for both power and precision by deepening your understanding of water's essential nature. They reached the secluded, training area Chiron had suggested, a clearing surrounded by high rock walls, with a large pool of water at its center. The space was designed for practicing potentially destructive abilities away from the main camp. This is perfect, Mizuki said approvingly, approaching the pool. She knelt at its edge, trailing her fingers through the water, which seemed to respond eagerly to her touch, swirling around her hand. Clean, well-sourced. Shall we begin? Percy joined her by the water's edge. What are we working on first? Yesterday, you experienced the initial phase of water knowing, sensing what exists within water. Mizuki explained. Today, we'll explore influencing those elements more precisely. She gestured to the pool. Reach out with your awareness as you did before. Tell me what you sense. Percy closed his eyes, extending his consciousness into the water as Mizuki had taught him. The sensation was easier to access this time, the awareness flowing more naturally from his mind into the pool. He could feel the various components of the water, minerals, microscopic life, dissolved oxygen, temperature variations. It's mostly clean, he reported. Some algae starting to form near the western edge. Mineral content is higher than the lake, more iron, some calcium. There's a colony of water fleas near the bottom, and something larger. A few frogs, I think, hiding in the underwater vegetation. Excellent, Mizuki said, her voice warm with approval. Now, instead of just observing, try to influence one specific element. Perhaps the algae. Attempt to encourage its growth in one area while discouraging it in another. Percy frowned in concentration, focusing on the algae he'd sensed. Previously, he might have simply moved the water containing the algae. But now he tried something different, connecting directly to the tiny organisms themselves, feeling their simple life force, their relationship with the water around them. Slowly, carefully, he encouraged nutrients to flow toward one patch while subtly altering conditions around another patch to make them less hospitable. It was delicate work, requiring a level of precision he wasn't accustomed to. After several minutes of intense concentration, he opened his eyes. I think I did something, but it's hard to tell with algae. Not exactly instant results. Mizuki was watching him with a mixture of surprise and admiration. You accomplished more than you realize. Look, she gestured to the pool, and Percy noticed that the water now showed visible patterns, areas of slightly different coloration where he'd influenced the algae growth, forming what looked almost like a trident shape across the pool's surface. I did that, he asked, startled by the visible evidence of his work. You did, Mizuki confirmed. Most water wielders require weeks of practice to achieve such precision. Your existing connection to water gives you an advantage, as does our covenant bond. Percy felt a surge of satisfaction. Most of his water abilities had always been combat-oriented: waves, storms, currents strong enough to capsize ships. This kind of subtle manipulation was entirely new territory. What else can I do with this? He asked, eager to explore further. Mizuki's smile widened at his enthusiasm. Water knowing extends to all aspects of water's domain. Healing through water purification, communication across water bodies, Even limited forms of water sight, seeing distant events where water is present. That sounds incredibly useful, Percy said, thinking of how often such abilities might have helped during past quests. We should try water sight next, Mizuki suggested. It builds naturally on the awareness you've already demonstrated. She knelt beside the pool again, motioning for Percy to join her. The water's surface smoothed at her gesture, becoming nearer still despite the slight breeze. Water retains impressions of what it witnesses, Mizuki explained. With practice, you can access these memories, or even view current events where water exists. Think of a place with water that you know well, somewhere not too distant for your first attempt. Percy though, UGHT immediately of the canoe lake at the center of camp. The main lake, he decided. There should be campers there now for afternoon activities. Perfect, Mizuki nodded. Now, extend your awareness into this pool. But instead of focusing on its contents, visualize the connection between all water. This pool connects to underground streams, which connect to the lake, creating a path for your consciousness to follow. Percy placed his hand on the water's surface, concentrating on the sensation of connection Mizuki described. It was more difficult than the previous exercise, not just sensing what was present, but extending his awareness beyond the immediate body of water. At first, nothing happened. Then, gradually, he began to feel something, like tendrils of awareness stretching outward. Following subterranean pathways he'd never consciously recognized before. He could sense the camp's plumbing system, irrigation pipes, the natural underground springs, all forming a complex network beneath the seemingly separate bodies of water above ground. Following one such connection, he directed his awareness toward the main lake. For a moment, there was resistance, as if he'd reached the limit of his perception. Then suddenly, like pushing through a membrane, his consciousness expanded. The pool's surface rippled, and an image formed, not a perfect reflection, but a wavering, textured view of the camp's canoe lake. He could see several campers in canoes, the Aphrodite cabin apparently practicing rowing techniques with limited success. On the shore, Clarice was instructing younger campers in basic spear techniques. I can see it, Percy said, amazed. The lake, the campers, everything. Remarkable for a first attempt, Mizuki murmured. Try focusing on a specific area, enhancing the detail. Percy concentrated on the image, directing his attention to the lake's far shore. The view shifted, zooming in on that area, revealing Grover sitting with a group of nymphs, seemingly in deep conversation. I wonder if I can hear anything, Percy wondered aloud, pushing his awareness further. The image wavered, nearly dissipating as he stretched his ability too far. Sound was apparently more difficult to capture than visuals. He caught fragments, Grover's voice saying something about perimeter monitoring and early warning system, before the entire image dissolved back into ordinary water. Percy sat back, feeling unexpectedly drained. That was intense. Water sight taxes even experienced practitioners, Mizuki assured him. Your range and clarity were impressive for an initial attempt. Percy rubbed his temples, feeling a dull headache forming. It's like using a muscle I didn't know I had. An apt description, Mizuki agreed. Like any ability, it strengthens with practice. But perhaps we should rest before attempting more. Overextending with new water abilities can be counterproductive. Percy remembered past incidents where pushing his powers too far had left him barely able to stand. No argument here. We can pick this up again tomorrow. As they prepared to leave the training area, Percy noticed Mizuki looking thoughtfully at the sky, which was beginning to show the golden hues of late afternoon. What is it? He asked, recognizing her expression of concern. Nothing definite, she said slowly. But there is a pressure in the air. Something gathering. Quote, Percy hadn't noticed anything unusual, but he'd learned to trust immortal senses. Susano again. Not directly, Mizuki replied. But perhaps an effect of his attention turning toward this place. The natural elements respond to divine focus, sometimes in subtle ways. Percy scanned the horizon but saw only clear skies with a few scattered clouds. Nothing obviously threatening. Still, a prickle of unease ran down his spine. We should get back to the others. If something's coming, better to be prepared. They made their way back toward the main camp area. Percy feeling both exhilarated by the new abilities he was developing and wary of what might be approaching. The Covenant was changing him already, expanding his connection to water in ways he'd never imagined possible. But those changes made him a target, not just for Susanoo but potentially for other divine beings who opposed the scroll's purpose. As they reached the dining pavilion, Percy spotted Annabeth waving them over to the Poseidon table, where she'd spread out several of the books she'd collected earlier. Camp rules about cabin-specific seating had relaxed somewhat over the years. Especially for research purposes. Find anything useful? Percy asked as they joined her. Maybe, Annabeth replied, turning one of the books toward them. It was written in ancient Greek, with illustrations of various divine beings, including one that clearly resembled Susanoo. According to this, Susanoo was banished from the Japanese heavens after offending his sister Amaterasu, the sun goddess. He has a history of challenging authority and crossing boundaries others respect. That tracks with what we've seen, Percy noted. There's more, Annabeth continued, flipping to another marked page. References to the Scroll of Divine Covenant are sparse, but this text suggests it was created during a rare celestial alignment that temporarily weakened barriers between pantheons. Collaboration between multiple divine traditions, intended to create controlled pathways between previously separate mythological realms. Why? Percy asked. What was the purpose? That's less clear, Annabeth admitted. Some sources suggest it was a response to a threat that required unified divine action, something that endangered multiple pantheons simultaneously. The scroll was created during the time of shadows, Mizuki said quietly, drawing their attention. A period when an ancient darkness threatened to consume divine realms across all traditions. The details have been obscured over millennia. Deliberately in many cases, as the knowledge was deemed dangerous. Dangerous how? Percy asked. Mizuki's expression grew grave. Some threats are awakened simply by remembering them too clearly. But what matters is that the scroll represented cooperation across divine boundaries, a recognition that separate pantheons were stronger together than apart. And Susanoo opposed this, Annabeth guessed. Along with others who preferred isolation and independence, Mizuki confirmed. The debate divided immortals within and across pantheons. Eventually, the scroll was hidden away when the immediate crisis passed. Deemed too disruptive to existing divine hierarchies. Percy considered this new information. So this isn't just about Susanoo's personal vendetta against the Covenant. It's about a fundamental disagreement among immortals about whether pantheons should interact at all. Precisely, Mizuki nodded. And you, Percy Jackson, have inadvertently positioned yours. Elf at the center of this ancient divine controversy. Story of my life, Percy muttered. Then a thought occurred to him. Wait, if the scroll was created to face some ancient threat, and it's awakening now. Does that mean the threat is returning too? The question hung in the air between them, unnerving in its implications. Before anyone could respond, a commotion from the direction of the woods drew their attention. Grover was running toward the dining pavilion, his goat legs pumping frantically, reed pipes clutched in one hand. Behind him, several nymphs emerged from the trees, their expressions alarmed. Percy, Grover called as he approached. We've got trouble. The dryads on the north edge of camp sense something approaching. Something that doesn't feel Greek. Percy exchanged glances with Mizuki and Annabeth. Looks like we're about to find out what Susanoo's next move is. They gathered at the top of Half-Blood Hill, near Talia's pine tree with its guardian dragon, Peleus. From this vantage point, they could see the winding country road that led toward camp, and beyond it, the dark line of forest that marked the property's northern boundary. The sky above that section of forest had turned strange. Not stormy exactly, but distorted, as if the air itself was being twisted. Colors seemed wrong, sounds muffled. Even from a distance, Percy could tell something unnatural was occurring. The boundary between worlds thins there, Mizuki observed, her voice tense. Not a direct breach, but a stretching. Chiron cantered up beside them, bow in hand. The magical barriers are holding. But there's pressure against them unlike anything I've felt before. Japanese origin, Percy guessed. Yes, Mizuki confirmed before Chiron could answer. But not Susanoo directly. This has the signature of lesser entities, yokai, perhaps, or minor kami responding to his influence. What's a yokai? Percy asked, keeping his eyes on the disturbed area. Spirit creatures from Japanese folklore. Annabeth answered. Thousands of varieties, from benign to deadly. Some are tricksters, others predators. Correct, Mizuki nodded. And they would not normally venture so far from their native territory. Susano must be compelling them, using them as proxies to test your defenses without directly violating the barriers himself. As if in response to her words, the distortion intensified. The air seemed to split along an invisible seam, creating what looked like a tear in reality itself. Through this opening, shapes began to emerge, indistinct at first, then gradually solidifying as they fully crossed into the mortal realm. Here they come, Chiron murmured, notching an arrow to his bow. Prepare yourselves. Percy uncapped Riptide, the familiar weight of the sword reassuring in his hand. Around him, other campers readied their weapons, Annabeth with her Dracon bone sword, Clarice with her electric spear, Talia with her bow and hunting knives. Nico stood slightly apart, his Stygian iron sword drawn, shadows gathering around him. The first creatures to emerge fully from the rift were immediately recognizable as threats. They resembled women with unnaturally long, flowing black hair that moved independently, like tentacles. Their faces were beautiful but mask-like, with eyes that gleamed an unnatural yellow. They wore traditional Japanese robes that seemed to blend into their hair at the edges. Futakuchi Onna, Mizuki identified them grimly. Hair-controlling demons. More creatures followed. Small, impish beings with red skin and long noses, tall, one-eyed humanoids carrying iron clubs, what appeared to be normal women until they turned, revealing completely blank faces from behind. Tengu, Oni, and Napara-bo, Mizuki continued, pointing to each group in turn. Susano has sent a sampling of yokai, testing which can cross the boundaries most easily, and which are most effective against Greek defenses. Percy counted at least 20 creatures of various types, with more still emerging. Any specific weaknesses we should know about? Most yokai are vulnerable to purified elements, blessed water, sacred fire, Mizuki replied quickly. Iron harms many, silver others. Their primary advantage is unfamiliarity, they fight differently than Greek monsters. We'll adapt, Percy said with more confidence than he felt. We always do. As the yokai advanced toward the camp boundary, they seemed to hit an invisible wall, the magical barrier that protected Camp Half-Blood. They pressed against it, testing its strength, their forms distorting slightly where they contacted the barrier. For a moment, Percy thought the defenses might hold without requiring direct confrontation. Then one of the Oni, the largest the club-wielding giants, swung its weapon in a mighty arc. Where it struck the barrier, cracks appeared in the air itself, like fractures in glass. They're breaking through, someone shouted. Impossible, Chiron muttered, though the evidence before them contradicted his words. The boundary should repel all hostile mythological entities. Not those from pantheons it wasn't designed to recognize, Mizuki said grimly. The barrier identifies them as threats but lacks specific protections against their nature. With a sound like shattering crystal, a section of the barrier gave way. It didn't collapse entirely, but a breach had formed, large enough for the yokai to begin pouring through. Defend the hill, Chiron commanded, loosing his first arrow. It struck one of the Tengu, causing the imp-like creature to dissolve into red mist. The campers surged forward, meeting the yokai advance. Percy found himself facing one of the Futakuchi Onna, her hair whipping toward him like deadly snakes. He slashed with Riptide, cutting through several tendrils, but they regenerated almost instantly. Their hair is their weapon and their weakness. Mizuki called out, her own form seeming to liquefy partially as she prepared for battle. Cut it at the roots. Percy dodged another hair attack, rolling beneath the strike to come up inside the creature's guard. With a precise slash, he ooped through the hair where it connected to the yokai's scalp. The creature shrieked, a sound like metal scraping on metal, and dissolved into black smoke. Around him, the battle was chaotic. Some weapons seemed effective against the yokai, while others barely harmed them. Talia's lightning strikes worked particularly well against the water-based creatures, while Nico's command of shadows disrupted the Napara-bo, who seemed partially composed of the same essence. Mizuki herself was magnificent in battle. Her human form partially dissolved into water, allowing yokai attacks to pass harmlessly through her. She countered with blades of pressurized water that sliced through the creatures with surprising effectiveness. Percy! Annabeth shouted from nearby, where she was fending off a particularly persistent Oni. They're targeting you specifically. Watch your back. She was right, Percy realized. Though the yokai were attacking all the campers, a disproportionate number were attempting to reach him. Susanoo had sent them with clear instructions: eliminate the Covenant holder. Percy called to the water inside him, feeling the new awareness Mizuki had taught him, expanding his control. Rather than simply commanding external water sources as he'd done in the past, he drew on the moisture in the air itself, condensing it around him in a swirling shield. Mizuki, he called out, can we combine our water abilities? She appeared beside him in an instant, flowing through the battle like a living stream. Follow my lead. Together, they created a synchronized water attack unlike anything Percy had attempted before. He provided the power, drawing water from multiple sources, while Mizuki guided its form with precise control. The result was a network of water tendrils that targeted the yokai with uncanny accuracy, striking their specific vulnerabilities. The tide of battle began to turn. The Greek campers, adapting quickly to these unfamiliar enemies, found effective strategies against each type of yokai. Clarice discovered that her electric spear was particularly devastating against the Oni. The Apollo cabin's arrows, when dipped in canteen water that Percy had blessed, became lethal to most yokai types. As the last few creatures were dispatched, Percy noticed the rift they had emerged from beginning to close. The distortion in the air was fading, reality reasserting itself. They're retreating, he announced, lowering Riptide slightly. No, Mizuki contradicted, her expression concerned. Something else is coming through. Something stronger. The rift, which had been shrinking, suddenly expanded again. The air around it darkened, taking on an ominous purple-black hue. Lightning crackled along the edges of the tear, and the scent of ozone and sea salt filled the air. A single figure stepped through, humanoid but at least 10 feet tall, with blue-tinged skin and eyes that glowed like storm clouds. It wore elaborate samurai armor that shifted between liquid and solid states, and carried a sword that appeared to be made of lightning itself. Its face resembled Susanoo's but was clearly not the god himself, a lieutenant, perhaps, or a lesser manifestation. Raijin. Mizuki identified it, her voice tight with concern. Thunder God, servant of Susanoo. The entity surveyed the battlefield with contempt, its gaze finally settling on Percy. When it spoke, its voice rumbled like distant thunder. Percy Jackson, my master sends his regards and a message. This is but a taste of what opposes the Covenant. Abandon the scroll while you still can. Percy stepped forward, Riptide gleaming in his hand. I don't respond well to threats. Tell Susanoo if he has something to say, he can deliver the message himself. Raijin's eyes narrowed. Bold words from one so vulnerable. Your first bond is barely formed, your covenant incomplete. You stand at the weakest point in your journey. He doesn't stand alone, Annabeth declared, moving to Percy's side. One by one, the other senior campers joined them, forming a protective line. How touching, Raijin sneered. Mortal loyalty, so fragile, so temporary. His gaze shifted to Mizuki. And you, Mizuchi, you betray your pantheon for this, half-blood. I recognize no betrayal in honoring the Covenant's purpose, Mizuki replied steadily. The scroll transcends single pantheon politics. Raijin raised his lightning sword. Then you will fall with him. Before the Thunder God could attack, something unexpected happened. A silver arrow streaked from the sky, striking the ground between Raijin and the demigods. The arrow burst into moonlight so intense that Raijin recoiled, shielding his eyes. A new voice spoke from behind Percy, clear, cold, and unmistakably divine. You trespass, Raijin. These demigods and this camp are under Olympian protection. Percy turned to see a 12-year-old girl with auburn hair and silver eyes standing calmly on the hill. Despite her apparent youth, she radiated power that made Raijin's display seem crude by comparison. A silver bow was in her hands, another arrow already nocked. Lady Artemis, Chiron acknowledged with a respectful bow. Raijin assessed the Olympian goddess with obvious caution. This matter does not concern Olympus, moon goddess. It is between Susanoo and the Covenant holder. You crossed into territory under my protection, Artemis replied coolly. That makes it my concern. Return to your master and inform him that Japanese deities have no authority here. For a tense moment, it seemed Raijin might challenge Artemis directly. Then, perhaps recognizing the full extent of her power, he lowered his weapon slightly. This confrontation is postponed, not prevented, he growled. The Covenant cannot proceed without opposition. His gaze locked with Percy's. We will meet again, son of Poseidon, when your Olympian protectors are not so conveniently present. With that, Raijin stepped backward into the rift, which sealed itself immediately after him. The unnatural distortion in the air dissipated, leaving only the normal afternoon light. Percy turned to Artemis, who was already being surrounded by her hunters. Thank you for the intervention. Your timing was perfect. The goddess's silver eyes studied him with an unreadable expression. My brother informed me of your situation, Percy Jackson. The activation of the Scroll of Divine Covenant concerns all Olympians. Apollo told you? Percy asked, surprised. The sun god wasn't known for his attention to potential threats. He sensed the scroll's awakening, Artemis explained. Ancient magic of this magnitude creates ripples across divine realms. The council is divided on how to respond. That didn't sound promising. Divided how, exactly? Some view the Covenant as a threat to established divine order, Artemis said carefully. Others see potential value in renewed connections between pantheons. And where do you stand? Percy asked directly. Something flickered in Artemis's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, which was unusual for the normally decisive goddess. I have not yet determined my position. Which is why I am here, to observe and assess. Percy nodded, understanding the subtext. Artemis hadn't just arrived to drive off Raijin, she'd come to evaluate the Covenant herself, to form her own opinion independent of the Council's debate. I'd be happy to explain what we know so far, Percy offered. Later, Artemis decided. First, tend to your wounded and repair your defenses. Raijin's retreat is temporary. Susanoo will not abandon his opposition so easily. As the goddess turned to confer with Talia, Mizuki approached Percy. Unlike the other fighters, she showed no signs of fatigue or injury from the battle. If anything, she seemed energized, her form more solid and defined than before. The Covenant bond strengthened during battle, she explained, noting his observation. Shared purpose accelerates the connection. I felt it too, Percy confirmed. When we combined our water attacks, it was like we were operating as a single unit rather than two separate beings. Mizuki nodded. The sense blending phase progresses faster than I anticipated. Your affinity for water makes our bond particularly compatible. Percy was about to ask more about this development when Chiron approached. His expression grave despite their victory. Percy, Mizuki, a moment please. The centaur led them slightly away from the others. This attack confirms our concerns about cross-pantheon threats. The camp's magical boundaries require immediate reinforcement. Can they be modified to recognize Japanese entities specifically? Percy asked. Perhaps, Chiron said, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Though a broader solution would be preferable, given that the Covenant may eventually involve entities from numerous pantheons. The scroll itself contains protective elements, Mizuki suggested. As Percy's first bond strengthens, we may be able to extend a measure of that protection to the camp boundaries. An excellent suggestion, Chiron approved. Work with Annabeth on the magical theory. In the meantime, he glanced toward Artemis, who was still deep in conversation with her hunters. The goddess's arrival is both helpful and complicating. You're worried about Olympian interference, Percy guessed. Chiron chose his words carefully. Let's say I'm concerned about competing divine agendas. The Covenant represents a significant shift in divine politics. Many immortals will have opinions on its progression, not all of them aligned with your best interests. You think Artemis might have her own motives for being here? Percy asked quietly. I think all gods have motives beyond what they openly declare. Chiron replied diplomatically. Artemis has always been more honorable than most, but she is still bound by Olympian politics. Percy nodded, understanding the warning. The Covenant was complicated enough without becoming a pawn in Olympian power struggles as well. I'll be careful, he promised. But having Artemis around might discourage further attacks from Susanoo's forces, at least temporarily. Quote, true enough, Chiron conceded. Use the respite wisely. Continue strengthening your bond with Mizuki, the faster you progress through the Covenant's initial stages, the better protected you'll be. Quote, as Chiron moved away to organize cleanup efforts, Percy found himself momentarily alone with Mizuki again. The Japanese water spirit was watching Artemis with an unreadable expression. What are you thinking? Percy asked her. I am thinking, Mizuki said slowly, that the moon goddess's arrival is not coincidental. The scroll calls to compatible divine beings across pantheons. Her presence here, so soon after its activation. Percy's eyes widened as he understood her implication. You think Artemis might be one of the 20? A potential Covenant partner. It would explain her personal interest in the situation, Mizuki reasoned. The call affects each divine being differently. Some feel it as curiosity, others as concern, but all feel something. The idea of Artemis, eternal maiden, sworn man-hater, as a potential divine partner seemed almost absurd. And yet, Percy had learned long ago not to dismiss possibilities simply because He contradicted established assumptions about the gods. I guess we'll find out, he said finally. If the scroll is calling to her, she'll have to address it one way or another. Mizuki nodded. The Covenant proceeds at its own pace. We cannot force bonds, but neither can we prevent them when conditions align. The cleanup from the battle took several hours. Though the yokai had dissolved a Po.N defeat rather than leaving physical remains like Greek monsters, they had caused significant damage to the area around the boundary. Trees were uprooted, the ground scarred by lightning strikes and club impacts. Even the magical barrier itself showed signs of strain, rippling occasionally like disturbed water. Percy worked alongside other campers to restore order, all while processing the implications of the attack. Susano had made his first move, testing Camp Half-Blood's defenses with expendable forces. The next attack would likely be stronger, better coordinated. They needed to prepare. As sunset approached, Percy found himself back at the Poseidon cabin, physically exhausted but mentally alert. The day's events had accelerated his bond with Mizuki in ways neither had anticipated. He could feel her presence now even when she wasn't physically nearby, a subtle awareness, like knowing the direction of the nearest body of water. A soft knock at the cabin door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Artemis standing outside, her silver eyes gleaming in the fading light. She had dispensed with her usual 12-year-old appearance, instead taking the form of a young woman. And perhaps 18 or 19, still recognizably Artemis, but more mature in aspect. Lady Artemis, Percy greeted her with surprise. Gods rarely made cabin calls. Percy Jackson, she replied formally. May I enter? There are matters we should discuss privately. Percy stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. Even after years of interacting with gods, there was something distinctly surreal about having Artemis in his cabin. I've sent my hunters to patrol the camp perimeter, she explained, glancing around the cabin with curious eyes. They'll alert us to any further incursions. Thank you, Percy said sincerely. The extra security helps. Artemis nodded, then came directly to the point. Show me the scroll. Percy hesitated only briefly before retrieving the scroll of Divine Covenant from his bedside table. He'd learned that it was generally better to comply with straightforward requests from gods rather than evade them. He handed the scroll to Artemis, who took it with visible caution. As one might handle an unpredictable explosive. The parchment shimmered at her touch, the symbols along its edges glowing faintly silver, responding to her divine essence. I remember this artifact, she said quietly. Her expression distant. From the time of shadows. I was among the Olympians who argued against its creation. You opposed it? Percy asked, surprised. Artemis's eyes met his. I believed then that pantheons should remain separate, distinct. That mixing divine essences would lead to complications. And now, Percy prompted when she fell silent. Now I am less certain, she admitted, running her fingers over the scroll's surface. The world has changed. Pantheons that once operated in isolation increasingly overlap in the modern mortal realm. Perhaps some form of structured connection is preferable to chaotic collision. She handed the scroll back to Percy, her expression thoughtful. The Covenant calls to compatible divine beings across traditions. I can feel its pull. Assessing my essence for alignment with its purpose. Mizuki suggested you might be. Percy hesitated, searching for diplomatic phrasing. A potential partner in your covenant. Artemis finished for him, a hint of amusement in her voice. Yes, I suspect that possibility concerns many on Olympus. The eternal virgin goddess, bound to a male demigod. Quite the scandal it would create. I wasn't assuming anything, Percy said hastily. No, you wouldn't, Artemis acknowledged. Your lack of presumption has always been one of your less irritating qualities, Percy Jackson. Coming from Artemis, this constituted high praise indeed. The covenant transcends conventional relationships, Percy said, repeating what Mizuki had explained. It's about divine connections and balanced power, not whatever people might assume. So I understand, Artemis replied. Though many immortals will see only what they expect to see, regardless of the truth. She paced the cabin, her movements graceful and silent. But my personal involvement is not the immediate concern. Susano's opposition is. You know him? Percy asked. We have met, on the rare occasions when divine paths cross between pantheons. Artemis confirmed. He is powerful, proud, and deeply traditional in his view of divine hierarchy. The idea of a mortal forming connections with multiple divi beings violates his sense of proper order. Mizuki said something similar, Percy noted. That he believes divine power should remain with gods alone. A common view among elder deities across pantheons, Artemis said. One I myself once held. Before, certain experiences changed my perspective. Percy suspected she was referring to events during the Titan and Giant Wars, when gods and my gods had fought side by side out of necessity. So what happens now? He asked. Will Olympus support the covenant, oppose it, or just watch from the sidelines? Artemis's expression grew more guarded. The council is divided. Zeus sees potential threats in cross-pantheon alliances but also potential advantages if properly aligned with Olympian interests. Poseidon, your father, advocates for non-interference, allowing the covenant to develop naturally. And the others? Opinions vary, Artemis said diplomatically. Athena sees strategic value in expanded divine connections. Ares anticipates interesting conflicts. Aphrodite. She grimaced slightly. Well, you can imagine her perspective on multiple divine unions. Percy could indeed imagine, and the thought made him cringe internally. For now, Artemis continued. I have authority to observe and assess, but not to intervene directly unless Olympian interests are clearly threatened. And are they? Percy asked directly. Threatened, I mean. Artemis considered the question seriously. Not yet, but potential exists in either direction. The covenant could strengthen Olympus through new alliances, or weaken it by diluting exclusive loyalty. I've never been exclusively loyal to Olympus, Percy pointed out. I've always put mortals first, and specific gods second based on their actions, not their titles. Precisely why some find you concerning. And others valuable, Artemis replied with a faint smile. You've never followed expected patterns, Percy Jackson. Why would your divine covenant be any different? Before Percy could respond, the cabin door opened, and Mizuki entered. She stopped abruptly upon seeing Artemis, then bowed with formal respect. Lady Artemis, I did not mean to interrupt. You aren't interrupting, Percy assured her. We were discussing the covenant and Olympian perspectives on it. Artemis studied Mizuki with evident interest. The first bond is forming well. I can see its resonance between you already. Mizuki straightened from her bow. Yes, Percy's affinity for water accelerates our connection beyond normal progression. And what stage have you reached? Artemis inquired, her tone casual but her attention sharp. Approaching essence blending, Mizuki replied. Water knowing is established, and dream sharing has begun. Artemis nodded as if confirming her own assessment. Impressive progress for such a short time. The covenant recognizes compatible spirits. Something in the way she said this caused Percy to look more closely at the goddess. Was it his imagination, or was Artemis evaluating Mizuki as a potential co-partner? The thought was so unexpected that Percy nearly missed the goddess's next words. I will remain at camp with my hunters for several days, monitoring the situation and providing additional security against Susano's forces. After that, I must report to Olympus. She turned to Percy. Continue strengthening your bond. The faster you progress through the covenant's early stages, the better positioned you'll be for what comes next. With that somewhat cryptic advice, Artemis departed, leaving Percy and Mizuki alone in the cabin. That was interesting, Percy said after a moment. I think she's considering the covenant herself. Yes, Mizuki agreed. She feels the scroll's call but resists acknowledging it directly. Our established identity conflicts with the possibility. Percy shook his head, still struggling to reconcile the idea of Artemis as a potential Covenant partner. It seems impossible, given her history and oaths. The Covenant predates many divine oaths, Mizuki reminded him. It operates on deeper, more fundamental divine laws. What seems contradictory through one lens may be harmonious through another. I guess we'll see, Percy said, not entirely convinced. In the meantime, we should focus on our bond. Artemis is right. The stronger we make it, the better prepared we'll be for whatever Susanoo tries next. Mizuki nodded, moving to sit cross-legged on the floor near Percy's fountain. The battle accelerated our connection. We should build on that momentum through meditation and shared consciousness. Percy joined her, mirroring her posture. What exactly does that entail? Water connects us, Mizuki explained. Through it, we can temporarily merge awareness, deepening our bond and accelerating the essence blending phase. She extended her hands, palms up, and Percy placed his hands on hers without hesitation. The contact sent a cool tingle up his arms, like plunging into a refreshing stream on a hot day. Close your eyes, Mizuki instructed. Focus on the water within and around us. Feel its flow, its connection, its memory. Percy followed her guidance, sinking into the meditation more easily than he expected. The water awareness he'd been developing expanded, encompassing not just physical water but the essence of water itself, its meaning, its history, its place in the fabric of existence. Through this expanded awareness, he sensed Mizuki's consciousness, not her thoughts exactly, but her presence, her perspective. He experienced water through her understanding. Ancient river beds shaped over millennia, the dance of molecules forming and reforming, the songs water sang to itself in the depths of oceans and the heights of clouds. In return, he felt her experiencing his connection to water, the fierce protectiveness of the son of the sea god, the instinctive command born of divine heritage, the personal relationship with each wave and current. They remained in this shared consciousness for what might have been minutes or hours. When Percy finally opened his eyes, night had fallen completely, moonlight streaming through the cabin's windows. Mizuki was watching him, her eyes reflecting the light like pools of still water. Percy searched for adequate words. Incredible. I felt like I understood water on a completely different level. The essence blending progresses, Mizuki confirmed with a smile. Soon you will be able to access aspects of my nature, just as I now share elements of yours. Percy noticed that she appeared more solid, more present in the physical world than before. You've changed too. You seem more here. Yes, she agreed, looking at her own hands with interest. The Covenant strengthens my connection to the mortal realm. I am becoming more anchored through our bond. Is that good? Percy asked, realizing he knew little about what Mizuki herself gained from their connection. Very good, she assured him. Water spirits exist primarily in liminal spaces, between physical and spiritual, between solid and liquid. We touch the mortal realm but cannot fully experience it. Through you, I gain substance, presence, participation. The way she said the last word conveyed depths of meaning Percy could only begin to comprehend, the longing of an immortal observer to become an active participant in the world she had watched for centuries. I'm glad, Percy said sincerely. It seems fair that the Covenant benefits both sides. That is its fundamental design, Mizuki replied. True balance. True exchange. Not domination or submission, but partnership. As they continued talking into the night, Percy found himself increasingly comfortable with Mizuki's presence. What had begun as a startling magical accident was evolving into something he valued, a connection unlike any he'd experienced before, neither quite friendship nor romance but something with elements of both and dimensions entirely its own. The Covenant was changing him, certainly. But perhaps not in the ways he had initially feared. Percy's dreams that night were vivid and significant, clearly influenced by the developing bond with Mizuki. He found himself standing on the shore of a vast, mist-covered lake. The water stretched to the horizon, perfectly still, reflecting stars that formed unfamiliar constellations. At the center of the lake stood a small island with a single cherry tree in full bloom, its pink petals occasionally falling to create ripples across the otherwise motionless surface. This is my true domain. Mizuki's voice came from beside him. She stood on the shore in more traditional Japanese attire, her hair adorned with small white flowers. The heart of my river's spirit. Where I dwell when not manifest in the physical world. It's beautiful, Percy said, meaning it. The place radiated peace and ancient power simultaneously. Few mortals have ever seen it, Mizuki told him, leading him along the shore. The covenant bond allows your consciousness to travel here during dreams. Is this the dream sharing you mentioned? Percy asked, looking around with new appreciation. Yes, through shared dreams, we can communicate regardless of physical distance, and I can show you aspects of my realm that would be difficult to explain in words. As they walked, Y noticed the landscape subtly shifting, sections of the shore taking on characteristics of Camp Half-Blood's beach, while others remained distinctly Japanese. The water itself seemed to flow between salt and fresh, ocean currents mixing with river patterns. Our domains begin to merge in small ways, Mizuki explained, noticing his observation. Your sea essence influences my river nature, creating something new where they meet. Is that normal for the covenant? It is expected, yes. The covenant doesn't erase individual nature but creates harmonious intersections. She smiled. Much like rivers flowing into the sea, both waters retain aspects of their original character while creating something unique at their confluence. They reached a stone pavilion that Percy was certain hadn't been there moments before. Inside, a low table held an ancient scroll that looked similar to but distinct from the scroll of Divine Covenant. What's this? Percy asked as they sat before the table. A history, Mizuki replied, carefully unrolling the parchment. The covenant's creation and purpose, as recorded by those who witnessed it. I thought you should understand more fully what you've become part of. The scroll's surface shimmered, and instead of text, images began to form, like a movie playing on ancient paper. Percy saw figures representing different pantheons gathering in what appeared to be a neutral divine realm. Greek gods in flowing chittons stood near Japanese kami in traditional attire, Egyptian deities with animal heads beside Norse gods bearing weapons of legend. The time of shadows, Mizuki narrated as the images shifted. A period when something ancient and primordial threatened to consume divine realms across all traditions. Separately, each pantheon struggled. Together, they discovered paths to resistance. The images showed the gods working together, Athena and Odin in deep discussion, Ra and Apollo combining solar powers, Susano and Poseidon controlling massive storm systems. They recognized that boundaries between pantheons, while useful for maintaining distinct traditions, became liabilities when facing threats that transcended those very boundaries, Mizuki continued. The Scroll of Divine Covenant was created as a solution, a means of forming controlled connections between previously separate divine realms. The scene shifted to Shish, a mortal with faint divine ancestry being presented with the newly created scroll. As the mortal's blood touched the parchment, lines of light extended outward, connecting to various divine beings from different traditions. The first covenant holder, Mizuki explained. A mortal hero with divine heritage, but not a true demigod, someone positioned between worlds, capable of building bridges where gods could not. What happened to them? Percy asked, fascinated by this hidden history. The images darkened, showing conflict among the gods. Some supported the covenant holder, while others opposed the very concept. Susano featured prominently among the opponents, his storms raging against the bridges the covenant had built. The covenant succeeded in its immediate purpose, the shadow was driven back, Mizuki said. But divine politics reasserted themselves afterward. Many gods feared the implications of continued cross-pantheon connections. The first covenant holder completed 16 bonds before. She hesitated. Before what? Percy prompted. Before being struck down by those who opposed the covenant's continuation, Mizuki finished quietly. Not by direct divine action, which was forbidden, but through mortal agents and lesser immortals. Like what Susano is attempting now, Percy realized. History repeating itself. There is a crucial difference, Mizuki pointed out. You are not merely a mortal with faint divine heritage. You are a true demigod, son of one of the big three, proven in multiple divine wars. Your capacity to sustain the covenant is significantly greater. The scroll's images shifted again, showing other covenant holders throughout history, never more than a handful in any given millennium, each forming bonds with divine beings from various traditions. Each facing opposition. Some succeeded in completing all 20 bonds, Mizuki said. They became nexus points between pantheons, maintaining controlled connections that allowed cooperation without chaos. Others fell before completion, returning the scroll to dormancy until the next worthy vessel appeared. And now it's my turn, Percy said, watching the final images fade from the scroll's surface. Yes, though no covenant holder has ever faced circumstances quite like yours, Mizuki observed. The modern world itself has changed divine relationships. Pantheons that on CE-operated continents apart now overlap in the global human consciousness. Technology connects mortals across traditional boundaries. Old divisions grow less relevant, making the covenant more necessary or more dangerous. Percy asked. Both, perhaps, Mizuki admitted. The potential for both harmony and discord increases as boundaries thin. The covenant offers structure where there might otherwise be chaos. The dream landscape around them rippled suddenly, the peaceful scene disturbed by an external force. Dark clouds gathered over the distant horizon, and the previously calm water began to churn. We are not alone, Mizuki said, rising quickly. Another presence touches the dream. Percy stood as well, instinctively reaching for Riptide before remembering this was a dream. His sword wouldn't be in his pocket here. The disturbance intensified, the water of the lake parting to form a path similar to the one Susanoo's aspect had created on the beach. But instead of the storm god, a different figure approached, feminine, wrapped in flowing white robes, her face obscured by a ceremonial mask. Amaterasu, Mizuki whispered, sounding shocked. She immediately bowed deeply. The sun goddess herself. Percy followed her lead, bowing respectfully though not as deeply. He'd learned that showing appropriate deference to gods was wise, but excessive subservience often earned their contempt rather than favor. The figure stopped before them, her presence radiating warmth and light even in the dream realm. When she spoke, her voice was melodious yet commanding. Rise, Mizuchi, rise, son of Poseidon. I do not come in judgment but in observation. They straightened, and Percy got his first clear look at the Japanese sun goddess. Though her face remained partially concealed behind her mask, he could see eyes that glowed like captured sunlight and hair that seemed woven from gold itself. Great Amaterasu, Mizuki addressed her formally. Your presence honors our dream sharing. The scroll of divine covenant awakens after centuries of slumber, Amaterasu said, her attention focusing on Percy. And chooses a Greek demigod as its vessel. Interesting times indeed. Not my choice, Percy said honestly. But I'm trying to understand my responsibility now that it's happened. Amaterasu made a sound that might have been a soft laugh. Refreshing honesty. Most WHO encounter divine artifacts immediately seek to exploit their power. I've had enough experience with godly powers to know they usually come with painful strings attached, Percy replied. Wise caution, Amaterasu acknowledged. Though in this case, the strings are not punitive but structural, the covenant forms connections that bind across pantheons, creating balance through relationship rather than separation. She turned slightly toward Mizuki. You chose well, Mizuchi, in answering the first call. Your waters complement his sea heritage, creating a foundation for what follows. Mizuki bowed again. I am honored by your approval, Great One. My brother opposes your covenant, Amaterasu continued, addressing both of them now. Susanoo believes divine power should remain concentrated rather than connected. He sees the scroll as a threat to established hierarchies. And you, Percy asked directly, do you share his view? Instead of taking offense at his directness, Amaterasu seemed pleased by the question. I recognize necessity when I see it. The boundaries between divine realms thin regardless of our preferences. Better to guide this process through the covenant than allow chaotic collapse. Then you support our bond? Mizuki asked, hope evident in her voice. I neither oppose nor directly support it, Amaterasu clarified. The covenant must prove its value through its own development. But I will not permit Susanoo to violate ancient accords in his opposition. Divine laws must be respected, even in changing times. Percy realized the significance of this statement. You're restraining him, limiting how directly he can intervene. I remind him of boundaries he would prefer to ignore, Amaterasu confirmed. Though his creativity in finding indirect means of interference should not be underestimated. Like sending yokai and Raijin to attack camp, Percy noted. Merely his opening moves, Amaterasu warned. Susanoo is a storm strategist. Hite. STS defenses before committing his true strength. Prepare accordingly. Any specific suggestions? Percy asked, figuring direct advice from a major goddess was worth requesting. Amaterasu's eyes gleamed with something like approval behind her mask. Strengthen what has begun before seeking what comes next. A covenant rushed is a covenant vulnerable. She turned to Mizuki. Show him water walking, Mizuchi. The ability to stand between states will serve him well in coming challenges. Mizuki nodded deeply. As you advise, Great One. The sun goddess began to fade, her form becoming translucent. I will watch your covenant's progression with interest, Percy Jackson. Prove worthy of the scroll's choice, and you may find allies where you least expect them. With those cryptic words, Amaterasu disappeared completely, taking the dark clouds with her. The dream landscape returned to its previous serenity, though Percy felt anything but calm. That was unexpected, he managed finally. Extraordinarily so, Mizuki agreed. Still appearing slightly stunned, Amaterasu rarely involves herself in matters outside Japanese tradition. Her appearance in our shared dream is significant. Good significant or bad significant? Potentially very good, Mizuki said. As Susanoo's sister and superior in the divine hierarchy, her restraining influence limits how directly he can move against us. Percy processed this new development. So we have the Japanese sun goddess as a neutral observer and the Greek moon goddess camping out at Half-Blood Hill. Divine politics are getting complicated. Indeed, Mizuki agreed with a small smile. Though both goddesses, interest suggests the covenant's importance extends beyond what we initially understood. Amaterasu mentioned water walking, Percy remembered. That's a new ability. Yes, Mizuki confirmed. The next aspect of water mastery the covenant will grant you, the ability to exist between states, neither fully immersed nor separate from water. It allows movement across water surfaces and, eventually, transformation between solid and liquid states. That sounds incredibly useful, Percy observed. While he'd always been able to move through water with ease, the ability to literally walk on its surface, or transform partially into water as he'd seen Mizuki do during battle, would add entirely new dimensions to his capabilities. It represents the essence blending phase of our bond, Mizuki explained. As my nature influences yours, abilities previously unique to water spirits become accessible to you. The dream began to fade around them. The misty lake and cherry tree island growing indistinct as morning approached in the waking world. Remember what Amaterasu advised, Mizuki said as the dream dissolved. Strengthen what has begun before seeking what comes next. Our bond must reach its full potential before the covenant proceeds to its next phase. Percy nodded, holding on to consciousness of the dream as it slipped away. Tomorrow, you teach me water walking. Tomorrow, Mizuki agreed, her voice becoming distant as the dream ended, you learn to stand between worlds. Percy woke to sunlight, streaming through his cabin windows and the sound of activity outside. For a moment, he lay still, processing the vivid dream and its implications. Amaterasu's appearance confirmed what he'd begun to suspect. The covenant had significance beyond his personal situation, representing larger shifts in divine politics across pantheons. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Annabeth and Grover waiting, both looking ready for action. Morning, Grover greeted him. Sleep well. You missed breakfast. Had an interesting dream visit from the Japanese sun goddess, Percy explained. Stepping back to let them enter. Apparently Susanoo has a sister who's keeping him somewhat in check. Annabeth's eyes widened. Amaterasu visited your dreams. That's unprecedented. Japanese deities rarely communicate directly with Greeks. The covenant changes normal rules, Percy said, quickly relating the substance of the dream meeting. She seemed concerned about maintaining proper divine protocols even while boundaries between pantheons are weakening. That tracks with what I found in my research, Annabeth said, setting a stack of notes on Percy's desk. Pantheon interactions have historically been governed by strict protocols established during rare convergences like the Time of Shadows. We've got more immediate concerns, though, Grover interjected. The nymphs report unusual activity in the woods again, not a direct incursion like yesterday, but something, watching. Scouts, Percy guessed. Susanoo assessing our defenses after the first attack failed. Probably. Grover agreed. And Chiron wants everyone on alert. Artemis and her hunters are patrolling the boundaries, but they can't cover everything. Percy nodded, quickly gathering his gear. Where's Mizuki? At the beach, Annabeth answered. She said something about preparing for training. Didn't elaborate further. Water walking lessons, Percy explained. Apparently, it's the next ability our covenant bond will develop. Grover raised an eyebrow. You're going to walk on water. Like, literally. That's the plan, Percy confirmed. Among other water state manipulations, Mizuki can partially transform into water during battle, pretty effective against physical attacks. The practical applications are significant, Annabeth noted thoughtfully. Especially, combined with your existing hydrokinesis. They walked together toward the beach, Percy filling them in on more details from the dream-sharing experience. Despite the seriousness of the situation, he couldn't help feeling a certain excitement about developing new abilities. After years of honing his demigod powers, the Covenant was opening entirely new dimensions to his water affinity. They found Mizuki standing at the edge of the sound, her form shimmering slightly in the morning sunlight. She turned as they approached, smiling warmly at Percy. You retained the dream sharing well, she observed. Many Covenant holders struggle to maintain full consciousness of shared dreams initially. It felt important, Percy said simply. Especially with Amaterasu making a guest appearance. Mizuki nodded. Her involvement changes certain calculations. Susano will be more cautious in his direct opposition, though likely more creative in his indirect approaches. Which is why we need to accelerate your training. Annabeth interjected practically. The faster you master these new abilities, the better prepared you'll be for whatever comes next. Precisely, Mizuki agreed. She turned to Percy. Are you ready to begin? Water walking requires focused concentration initially, though it eventually becomes instinctive. Percy nodded, removing his shoes and socks. What's the basic concept? Is it like hardening the water surface, or something about surface tension? Neither, Mizuki replied. It's about existing in harmony with water's dual nature, not forcing it to support you, but becoming partially of its essence so that you belong neither fully above nor fully below its surface. Annabeth and Grover exchanged glances at this explanation. Maybe we should give you some space for this, Grover suggested tactfully. Sounds like Covenant-specific training. You're welcome to observe, Mizuki assured them. But yes, this ability emerges directly from our bond rather than Percy's inherent demigod powers. As his friends settled on the sand to watch, Percy joined Mizuki at the water's edge. She stood with her feet partially submerged in the gentle surf, her form seeming to blend with the water where they touched. First, you must feel the threshold between states, she instructed. Water is unique among elements in how readily it transforms, from solid to liquid to vapor and back again. This fluidity is its essential nature, and the source of water walking's power. Percy placed his feet in the water beside hers, feeling the familiar connection to his element. But instead of focusing on controlling the water as he usually did, he tried to sense what Mizuki described, the transitional quality, the constant state of potential transformation. The Covenant bond allows you to share in my nature as a water spirit, Mizuki continued. We exist perpetually between states, neither fully physical nor fully elemental. Through our connection, you can access this liminal existence. She stepped forward, moving fully onto the water's surface. Instead of sinking, she stood upon it as if it were solid ground, though small ripples emanated from where her feet touched the surface. Now you try, she encouraged. Don't think of it as standing on water, but as sharing states with it. You are partly water already, through your divine heritage. The Covenant simply expands this affinity. Percy took a deep breath and stepped forward. His foot began to sink as usual, but then he focused on the sensation Mizuki described, the threshold between states. The shared essence between his nature and the waters. To his surprise, his foot stopped sinking, coming to rest just slightly below the surface, as if caught in an invisible layer between air and water. Encouraged, he shifted his weight forward and brought his other foot alongside the first. He was standing on water, or more accurately, in its uppermost layer, his feet creating distinct impressions on the surface without breaking through completely. I'm doing it, he called excitedly, then promptly lost his concentration and sank up to his knees. Mizuki laughed, the sound like water chimes. An excellent first attempt. Most take days to achieve even that much stability. From the shore, Annabeth and Grover cheered encouragingly. Percy grinned, pulling his legs back up to try again. This time, he maintained his focus longer, managing several steps across the surface before sinking again. The key is maintaining awareness of your dual nature, Mizuki coached. Not commanding the water, but communing with it. Feel how my presence in the covenant bond changes your relationship to water itself. Percy closed his eyes, reaching through their developing bond to sense what Mizuki described. There it was, a subtle shift in his perception of water, no longer just an element he controlled externally, but something his own nature partially shared. Through Mizuki's influence, he could feel the potential for transformation within himself, solid to liquid and back again, just as water changed states. When he opened his eyes and stepped forward again, the difference was immediate. He stood firmly on the water's surface, creating only small ripples where his feet made contact. It wasn't perfect. He could feel his concentration maintaining the state rather than it being effortless, but it was functional. Now walk to me, Mizuki encouraged, standing several yards away on the water's surface. Percy took careful steps, finding that a normal walking gait was actually more difficult than a smooth, flowing movement that matched water's natural rhythms. By adjusting his pace to flow with the gentle waves rather than fighting against them, he made steady progress. That's it, Mizuki called approvingly. You're harmonizing with the water's movement rather than imposing your will upon it. Percy reached her side, standing triumphantly on the water's surface. Though he still needed to maintain concentration, the sensation was becoming more natural with each passing minute. This is amazing, he said, looking down at his feet, creating small depressions in the water's surface without breaking through. Different from anything I've done with water before. It is the beginning of essence blending, Mizuki explained. Your nature and mine intersecting through the covenant bond. With practice, you'll develop further abilities, partial transformation, water passing, even rain calling. Rain calling, Percy questioned. The ability to draw moisture from the air and form localized precipitation. Mizuki clarified, useful in both combat and survival situations. They practiced for another hour, Percy gradually extending his range and confidence on the water's surface. By the end of the session, he could run short distances, change direction smoothly, and even perform basic combat movements without sinking. As they returned to shore, Annabeth and Grover applauded his progress. That was incredible to watch, Annabeth said. It's different from your usual water control, more integrated somehow. Exactly, Percy agreed, still exhilarated by the new ability. It's not about forcing the water to support me, it's about becoming partially water myself. The covenant changes inherent nature, not just grants powers, Mizuki explained. Each bond influences the holder's very essence, creating new possibilities through shared divine aspects. Speaking of bonds, Grover interjected, looking slightly uncomfortable, there's something you should probably know, Percy. Artemis has been asking a lot of questions about the scroll and how the covenant works. Specifically about compatibility factors. Percy exchanged glances with Mizuki. You think she's considering the covenant herself? It seems possible, Annabeth said carefully. She spent most of the morning in conversation with Talia and her other senior hunters. Looked like a serious discussion. The scroll calls to compatible divine beings differently, Mizuki reminded them. Some feel it immediately, others gradually as the covenant develops. If Artemis senses potential alignment with its purpose, she would naturally seek to understand it fully before making any decision. But Artemis, Grover questioned, clearly struggling with the concept. Eternal maiden, sworn to independence from male influence. It seems contradictory. The covenant transcends conventional relationships, Mizuki repeated. Divine bonds formed through the scroll connect essences and domains, not merely individuals in the mortal sense of partnership. Still, Annabeth mused, for Artemis to even consider it represents a significant departure from her established identity. There must be compelling factors at work. Percy wasn't sure how to feel about this possibility. Artemis had always been among the more reasonable Olympians in his experience, harsh but fair, committed to her principles. The idea of forming a covenant bond with her was simultaneously intimidating and intriguing. We shouldn't speculate too much, he decided finally. The scroll operates on its own timeline. If Artemis is meant to be part of the covenant, that will become clear when the time is right. The others nodded in agreement, though Percy could tell both Annabeth and Grover remained intensely curious about the possibility. He couldn't blame them. The idea of Artemis forming any kind of bond with a male, even one as unconventional as the Covenant offered, represented a fundamental shift in divine politics. As they walked back toward the main camp area, Percy noticed unusual activity near the big house. Campers were gathered in clusters, and Chiron appeared to be organizing some kind of council meeting. "What's happening?" he asked as they approached. "Message from Olympus," clarified a daughter of Hermes who was passing by. "Apparently the gods are officially acknowledging the Covenant situation. Chiron's called a general assembly." Percy felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at this news. Formal Olympian acknowledgement meant the Covenant's activation was being taken seriously at the highest divine levels. Whether that would translate to support or opposition remained to be seen. They joined the gathering crowd at the amphitheater, which could accommodate the entire camp. Chiron stood at the center, with Artemis beside him in her teenage form, looking solemn. The goddess's silver eyes found Percy in the crowd, her expression unreadable. Once everyone was settled, Chiron raised his hands for silence. "Campers, as many of you are aware, recent events have placed Camp Half-Blood at the center of significant mythological developments. The activation of the Scroll of Divine Covenant by Percy Jackson has drawn attention from multiple divine pantheons." Murmurs spread through the crowd, though most had already heard at least parts of the story through camp gossip. "Lady Artemis brings word from Olympus regarding the council's official position on this matter," Chiron continued, gesturing respectfully to the goddess. Artemis stepped forward, her silver aura subtly illuminating the space around her. "Demigods of Camp Half-Blood, I bring the decision of the Olympian Council regarding the Scroll of Divine Covenant." The amphitheater fell completely silent. Every camper focused intently on the goddess's words. After considerable debate, Artemis continued, "The council has determined that the Covenant's activation represents a significant, but not inherently threatening development in divine affairs. As such, Olympus will neither directly support nor oppose the Covenant's progression." Percy released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Neutrality was probably the best outcome they could reasonably hope for. However, Artemis added, her gaze finding Percy again, given the cross-pantheon implications and potential for conflict with non-Greek divine entities. "The Council has authorized limited protective measures for Camp Half-Blood while the Covenant holder resides here." This was unexpected good news. Percy had worry. The camp might be left vulnerable to attacks like yesterday's yokai incursion. These measures include temporary reinforcement of the camp's magical boundaries against non-Greek mythological threats, Artemis elaborated. "And the continued presence of my hunters to monitor potential incursions." She paused, then added what seemed like a personal observation rather than an official pronouncement. "I will remain at camp myself for the immediate future, both to oversee these protections and to observe the Covenant's development more directly." Percy caught Mizuki's knowing glance from beside him. The water spirit clearly interpreted Artemis's continued presence as confirmation of her potential interest in the Covenant. Additionally, Artemis continued, "Lord Poseidon has requested that his son be informed of his personal position." Her expression softened slightly. "Your father supports your right to pursue the Covenant as you see fit, Percy Jackson. He asks only that you exercise the wisdom you have demonstrated in past challenges." This message from his father meant more to Percy than the official Olympian declaration. Poseidon's support, even distantly expressed, provided reassurance he hadn't realized he needed. Finally, Artemis concluded, "The Council acknowledges that the Scroll of Divine Covenant operates under ancient divine laws that transcend individual pantheon authorities. Its progression cannot be dictated by Olympian decree, nor by the will of other divine councils. Its path will unfold according to its own design." With that statement, she stepped back, yielding the floor to Chiron once more. The centaur looked relieved at the relatively positive message from Olympus. In light of this pronouncement, Chiron addressed the camp, "We will continue preparing our defenses against potential threats while supporting Percy and Mizuki in developing their Covenant bond. All regular activities will continue, but with enhanced security measures in place." He detailed specific adjustments to camp schedules, additional combat training focusing on non-Greek mythological threats, expanded patrol rotations, reinforcement of magical boundaries under Artemis's guidance. As the assembly dispersed, Percy found himself approached by Artemis herself. The goddess motioned for him to walk with her, away from the curious ears of other campers. "There are aspects of the council's discussion I could not share publicly," she said once they were alone, Mizuki respectfully following several paces behind. "Opinions were divided regarding your covenant." "I'm not surprised," Percy replied. "Gods rarely agree on anything." A hint of amusement flickered across Artemis's face. "True enough. Some, like your father and Hermes, advocated complete non-interference. Others, primarily Zeus and Ares, suggested more restrictive oversight. And you?" Percy asked directly. "Where did you stand in the debate?" Artemis considered him thoughtfully. Quote, "I argued for the position that ultimately prevailed, limited protection without direct intervention in the covenant itself. The scroll's magic predates many Olympian protocols. Attempting to control it would be both presumptuous and potentially dangerous." She paused before adding, "I also suggested that the covenant might offer strategic advantages for Olympus if approached with appropriate respect for its autonomous nature." Strategic advantages? Percy questioned. "Structured connections to other pantheons could prove valuable in an increasingly complex divine landscape," Artemis explained. "The mortal world grows smaller through technology and globalization. Divine realms inevitably reflect this convergence. Better to have established protocols for interaction than chaotic collision." Her reasoning echoed what Mizuki and Amaterasu had separately expressed, the idea that pantheon boundaries were already weakening regardless of divine preference. "The scroll seems to have awakened at a pivotal moment," Percy observed. "Indeed," Artemis agreed, "though whether by design or coincidence remains unclear." She glanced skyward, as if checking the sun's position. "I must return to my hunters. We're establishing enhanced perimeter monitoring against further incursions." As she turned to leave, Percy felt compelled to ask one more question. "Lady Artemis, Mizuki believes he scroll may be calling to compatible divine beings beyond her. Is that something you've sensed?" The goddess went very still, her silver eyes meeting his directly. For a moment, Percy feared he'd overstepped by asking so personally. "The scroll's magic is interesting," she finally said, choosing her words with evident care. "It operates on principles that predate many divine oaths and identities. What seems contradictory through one lens may appear harmonious through another. It wasn't a direct confirmation, but neither was it a denial." Percy recognized the echo of Mizuki's earlier words about divine laws and perspectives. "Whatever path the covenant takes," Artemis continued, her voice softening slightly, "know that my respect for you remains, Percy Jackson. Few males have RNED that distinction throughout my millennia of existence." With that somewhat cryptic statement, she departed, leaving Percy to ponder its implications with Mizuki. "She feels the call," Mizuki saw it softly once Artemis was out of earshot, "but struggles with how it challenges her established identity." If the covenant truly transcends conventional relationships, Percy asked, why would her vows of maidenhood conflict with it? "The conflict is less in the reality than in perception," Mizuki explained. "Divine identities are shaped and reinforced by mortal understanding and belief. Ms. has been defined by her independence from male influence for millennia. Even if the covenant offers connection without compromise, the appearance of contradiction troubles her." Percy nodded, beginning to understand the complexities involved. "And if she does eventually answer the scroll's call, then the covenant will incorporate her domain, moonlight, the hunt, wilderness, expanding our connection to those aspects of existence while granting her new anchors in the mortal realm," Mizuki said. "Each divine bond brings unique elements to the covenant's whole." They walked in thoughtful silence back toward the training areas, where campers were practicing combat techniques against unfamiliar opponent types based on Mizuki's descriptions of Japanese yokai. "Should we continue water walking practice?" Percy suggested, eager to develop his new abilities further. "First, let us check the scroll," Mizuki replied. "The covenant bond strengthened significantly during this morning's training. There may be developments." Quote, Percy retrieved the scroll from his pocket, where he'd kept it since its activation. As he unrolled it on a nearby bench, he immediately noticed changes from the previous day. The illustrations had shifted, with the figure representing himself now standing partially within a water symbol, while the Mizuki figure appeared more solid and defined. Lines of energy connected them, forming intricate patterns that pulsed with blue-green light. More intriguingly, a new illustration had begun to form adjacent to theirs, still indistinct, but unmistakably female in form, with what appeared to be a silver bow and crescent moon symbols surrounding it. As that, Percy began. Artemis, Mizuki confirmed, or more precisely, the potential for her inclusion in the Covenant. The scroll reflects possibilities before they manifest fully, so the next summons might involve her. Perhaps, Mizuki said cautiously. Though the timing depends on multiple factors, your readiness, her willingness, and external circumstances that might accelerate the need. Percy studied the emerging illustration thoughtfully. And if she does join the Covenant, what happens to her hunters? To her divine responsibilities. They continue, Mizuki assured him. The Covenant doesn't remove or replace existing divine roles and connections, it adds new dimensions to them. Artemis would remain goddess of the hunt, protector of maidens, leader of her hunters. The Covenant simply creates an additional facet to her divine expression. This explanation eased some of Percy's concerns. The last thing he wanted was to disrupt Artemis's important role in the Greek pantheon or her relationship with the young women who depended on her protection. As they continued examining the scroll, Percy noticed something else. Faint symbols forming around the edges of the parchment, different from the Greek and Japanese characters already present. Are those new languages appearing? He asked, pointing to the emerging markings. Mizuki leaned closer, her expression shifting to surprise. Yes. Egyptian hieroglyphs and, I believe, Norse runes. The Covenant's reach express ands beyond Greek and Japanese pantheons. So future partners might come from those traditions as well. It appears so, Mizuki confirmed. The scroll adapts to changing divine landscapes. Egyptia and Norse deities have maintained stronger presences in the Western world than some other traditions, making them natural expansions of the Covenant's scope. Percy tried to imagine divine partners from pantheons he knew even less about than Japanese mythology. The prospect was simultaneously intimidating and fascinating. One challenge at a time, he reminded himself aloud. First priority is strengthening our bond and preparing for whatever Susanoo tries next. Mizuki nodded approvingly. Wise perspective. The Covenant unfolds best when each stage is fully embraced before the next begins. They rolled the scroll closed and returned it to Percy's pocket. As they headed toward the beach to continue water walking practice, Percy reflected on how quickly his life had changed direction. Just days ago, he'd been helping clean the camp attic, feeling somewhat adrift in his post-war life. Now he stood at the center of divine politics across multiple pantheons, developing abilities he'd never imagined, with the potential for connections to immortal beings from traditions he barely understood. Yet despite the overwhelming nature of these changes, Percy felt more purposeful than he had in months. The Covenant offered something beyond mere power or divine politics. It created bridges between worlds that had remained separate for too long. In a strange way, it suited him perfectly. He'd always existed between realms, not fully mortal, not fully divine, finding his place in the spaces between established categories. Perhaps that was why the scroll had chosen him after all. No, because he was the most powerful demigod or the most politically connected, but because he understood what it meant to belong to multiple worlds simultaneously, to find strength in connections rather than divisions. As he stepped onto the water's surface beside Mizuki, feeling the new awareness that allowed him to stand between states, Percy Jackson embraced his role as Covenant holder with growing confidence. Whatever challenges Susanoo and others might throw at him, whatever divine partners might join their bond in the future, he would face it all with the same determination that had carried him through 2 divine wars. After all, building bridges was ultimately more satisfying than fighting battles, even if you had to do a bit of both along the way. Chapter 2 End.